The hum was the first sign. Not a sound, not really. It was more of a feeling, a low-frequency vibration that seemed to bypass the ears and settle directly in your molars. For 24 hours, it had been the city's unwanted background music, a silent bass note of anxiety that had most of the population reaching for aspirin and complaining of migraines. From his 47th-floor apartment, Leo watched the world unravel in glorious, high-definition chaos across 6 different monitors. One screen showed CNBC, where a flustered analyst was trying to explain why the price of canned chili and bottled water was suddenly behaving like a meme stock. Another was tuned to a Doomsday Preppers livestream, the guy's face a mask of vindicated glee as he fondled a ludicrously large hunting knife. The others streamed foreign news, police scanners, and a dark web forum where blurry videos of people going berserk in a European subway were being uploaded and deleted in a frantic rhythm. A once-in-a-century solar flare, the official news anchors called it. Leo took a slow sip of his single-origin Ethiopian coffee. Cute, he muttered to the empty room. That's like calling a tactical nuke a spicy firecracker. Outside, the city still pretended to be normal. Yellow cabs swam through the concrete canyons, and people hurried along the sidewalks, heads down, clutching their briefcases and their lattes. But the normality was a cheap veneer. Leo could see the cracks. The 7-Eleven on the corner had a handwritten, "Limit 2 per customer," sign taped over the instant noodle aisle. Armed National Guard trucks, painted in an oddly cheerful desert tan, were parked discreetly in the side streets. The government was saying, "Stay calm," but its actions were screaming, "We're screwed." Leo, however, was the calmest man in North America. For him, the end of the world wasn't a surprise. It was a scheduled event he had been preparing for years. He ran a mental checklist. The apartment was ready. What looked like a sleek, minimalist bachelor pad was, in reality, a miniature fortress. The floor-to-ceiling windows were coated with a shatterproof film. The stylish decorative panels on the walls hid sound-dampening foam and a reinforcing steel mesh. And the front door, the front door was his masterpiece. It looked like any other solid oak door in this luxury building, but beneath the veneer was a tungsten carbide core with a multi-point locking system he'd installed himself. It was a love letter to paranoia, but his apartment was just the opening act. His real genius lay in a climate-controlled warehouse on the industrial outskirts of the city. While the YouTube preppers were hoarding beans and bullets, Leo, a former logistics and supply chain manager, had been hoarding what everyone else considered trash. Through his industry contacts, he'd spent the last 3 years buying up literal tons of e-waste for scrap metal prices. Pallets of dead motherboards, bins overflowing with cracked smartphone screens, drums filled with used lithium-ion batteries. To the world, it was garbage. To Leo, it was a treasure trove of gold, copper, rare earth elements, and complex microcircuitry. He'd also stockpiled industrial-grade salt, MSG, and synthetic flavorings, things that required a complex chemical industry to produce, an industry that was about to go extinct. He wasn't preparing to survive. He was preparing to thrive. A sudden sharp pain lanced through his skull, far worse than the dull ache from the city's hum. Leo gritted his teeth, his hand tightening on his coffee mug. It felt like something was trying to pry his brain open. A cool, refreshing sensation, like a drop of menthol, bloomed in the center of the pain, spreading outwards. It wrapped around him, a strange, invisible film on his skin. The pain subsided as quickly as it came. He felt different, clearer. The low-frequency hum of the city was still there, but it no longer bothered him. He absent-mindedly nudged a pen off his desk. Instead of falling straight down, it wobbled in midair for a split second, veering a few inches to the left before clattering to the floor. Leo stared at the pen. Then he grinned, a wide, slightly unhinged grin. "Well, hello there," he whispered. A little party favor before the main event. A thunderous bass drop from the floor above rattled his light fixtures. Ah, yes, the main event's opening act, Chad. Chad was the trust fund idiot who lived in the penthouse directly above him. A chiseled jaw, empty-eyed monument to inherited wealth and protein shakes. He considered Leo the creepy nerd downstairs, and made it a point to be as obnoxious as possible. Tonight, judging by the noise, he was hosting "The world might be ending, so let's get wasted" party. A sharp, aggressive knock hammered on his tungsten core door. Leo watched on his security monitor as Chad, flanked by 2 equally beefy friends and a bleach blonde girl who looked like her name was Tiffany, stood impatiently in the hallway. Leo opened the door. Chad, reeking of expensive cologne and cheap tequila, puffed out his chest. Yo, Leo, he slurred, not even making eye contact, instead looking over Leo's shoulder into his apartment. Gonna need you to stop with the death stares, man. You're creeping out my girl. Tiffany giggled, clinging to Chad's arm. Like, seriously, his eyes are so weird. Leo remained silent, his gaze flat and calm. His newly awakened senses were picking up strange things. He could feel the thrum of anxiety from Chad's friends, the vapid emptiness from Tiffany, and the arrogant, belligerent static coming off Chad himself. You hear me, freak? Chad took a step forward, trying to use his size to intimidate. I'm talking to you. He jabbed a finger toward Leo's face. Leo didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. Enraged by the lack of a reaction, Chad shoved him hard in the shoulder. What, you deaf or something? It was a moment of pure, unadulterated slapstick. The instant Chad's hand made contact, the invisible film of energy around Leo flared. To an outside observer, it would have looked like Chad, a former college football player, had slipped on an invisible banana peel. His forward momentum was bizarrely redirected. He stumbled sideways, arms flailing wildly, his expensive loafers squeaking on the polished floor before he crashed into the opposite wall with a loud thud. His two friends froze, their jaws slack. Tiffany let out a tiny shriek. Chad scrambled up, his face a mask of crimson fury and utter confusion. What the hell? Did you trip me? Leo still hadn't said a word. He simply raised an eyebrow, and his gaze, which Tiffany had called weird, now seemed to sharpen into something terrifyingly cold and predatory. It was a look that said, you are an insect, and I am debating whether or not to squash you. The primal part of Chad's brain, the part that hadn't been smothered by steroids and privilege, screamed at him. He and his friends felt a sudden, suffocating pressure, an unspoken threat that made the hair on their arms stand up. They were looking at Leo, the quiet nerd, but they were seeing a wolf. Without a word, Leo stepped back and closed his heavy door. The multi-point locking system engaged with a series of satisfying, definitive clicks. Ka-chunk, ka-chunk, ka-chunk. He leaned his back against the cool metal, a slow smile spreading across his face. Phase 1 of idiot filtering, he chuckled to himself. Success. In the hallway, Chad stared at the door, his face a mixture of rage and a newfound, unsettling fear. That little psycho, he seethed to his friends. I'm not done with him. I'm gonna call up Rico and his boys. We're gonna teach that loser a lesson tonight. Miles away, in a sterile research wing of a private biotech firm, a lab technician watched in horror as a cage full of rhesus monkeys, subjects of a recent neurological experiment, simultaneously went berserk. They tore at their own flesh and threw themselves against the reinforced glass with savage, unprecedented fury. The facility's emergency alarm system remained eerily silent, its circuits fried. In the of a downtown hospital, a young, brilliant but exhausted Dr. Evelyn Reed slammed down a patient's chart. It was the 10th case in 3 hours, all of them presenting with acute paranoia, psychosis, and pupils dilated to black pinpricks. Their blood work was normal, their brain scans were clear, yet they behaved like rabid animals. She had a sinking feeling this was no known disease. This was something new, something terrible. Back in the penthouse, Chad was on his phone, slurring threats and promises of cash to some low-level thugs. Yeah, the weirdo in 47B. Just scare him a little. Rough him up. I want him to know who runs this building. Leo, meanwhile, was sitting cross-legged on his floor, eyes closed. He was meditating, exploring the strange new energy field around him, learning its contours, its feel. He could sense the vibrations of the party upstairs, the angry thumping of Chad's heart, even the faint, anxious pulse of Dr. Reed in that distant hospital. He was connected to the city's dying nervous system. He was ready. The clock on his monitor, powered by a dedicated uninterruptible power supply, ticked over. 11 hours 59 minutes and 58 seconds. 11 hours 59 minutes and 59 seconds. 12 hours 0 minutes and 0 seconds. Every light in the city, every screen, every humming refrigerator, and every blaring sound system, flashed once in a brilliant, actinic white pulse. And then, died. A profound, deafening silence fell over the metropolis. The silence of a billion dead circuits. The silence of the grave. Through his window, Leo watched a thin, pearlescent fog, the electrocharge mist, begin to curl up from the streets below, seeping into every crack and crevice of the concrete jungle. The silence lasted for exactly 15 seconds. Then, from the hallway just outside his tungsten core door, came the first scream. It wasn't a scream of fear. It was a wet, guttural, utterly inhuman roar of pure, mindless rage. The end of the world hadn't knocked. It had kicked the door in. 6 hours. That's how long it had been since the world ended. From the 47th floor, the city formerly known as New York was an unrecognizable hellscape submerged in a churning sea of gray. The electro-charged mist, as Leo had privately dubbed it, wasn't a dense fog that blocked vision, but a thin, sickly shroud that swirled around the dead skyscrapers. It had a faint, pearlescent glow, like the inside of an abalone shell, and it hummed with a static that made your teeth ache. Outside his reinforced windows, the symphony of civilization's collapse played on an endless loop. The wet, guttural roars of the newly turned wanderers, the splintering crash of furniture being thrown from a high-rise opposite, the distant, frantic screams that were abruptly cut short. It was a cacophony of pure terror. Inside Leo's apartment, however, there was only a profound, almost sacred silence. The utilities had died precisely at midnight, as predicted. No power, no water pressure, no internet. The city's digital heartbeat had flatlined, and in its place was a primal fear that was far more terrifying than any news report. Leo could almost hear the collective gasp of 8 million people realizing their phones were now just expensive bricks, their lifelines to family, friends, and information severed in a single instant. The desperate cries for a flashlight, for a working phone, for any connection to a world that no longer existed, had been the first sounds to pierce the initial quiet. For Leo, the silence was bliss. He sat cross-legged on his polished hardwood floor, not in meditation, but in rapt attention. Floating in the air before him, visible only to his eyes, was a holographic interface. It was a simple, elegant design of glowing blue lines and translucent text boxes. Primordial Myriad Realms Trading System. Host, Leo Vance. Status, online. Awaiting first transaction. Available worlds. Searching. The system had flickered into existence in his mind the moment the city-wide pulse had struck. It was the party favor he had sensed earlier, now fully bloomed. He found that just by focusing on the cool, logical interface, the raw energy of his newfound mental force field seemed to nourish itself. The invisible shield around him, which had comically deflected Chad, now felt more substantial. He could consciously hold it, a shimmering film of compressed air, for a full 10 seconds before feeling a slight mental drain. A small, but significant, upgrade. With a grunt, he stood up and walked over to a closet that, to any guest, would have looked like it held cleaning supplies. Instead, he pulled out a heavy-duty cardboard box with E-Waste. Batch 7 inches scrawled on the side in black marker. He tipped it over. A cascade of technological ghosts tumbled onto the floor. Cracked iPhones, shattered Samsung Galaxies, a dozen different models of Androids with dead screens and broken charging ports. To the rest of the world, this was a pile of garbage waiting for a landfill. To Leo, it was a dragon's hoard. "All right, you beautiful pieces of junk," he murmured, picking up an old iPhone 6 with a spiderweb of cracks across its face. "Time to earn your keep." He placed the phone onto a designated trade area on the holographic interface. The system whirred to life. Analyzing item. Terrestrial mobile communication device, damage. Detected materials. Aluminosilicate glass, anodized aluminum, copper, gold, tungsten, various rare earth elements. Structural complexity. Grade D, intricate microcircuitry detected. Residual energy signature. Grade F, depleted lithium-ion cell. Overall value. 1.2 trade points. Leo's grin was predatory. 1.2 points for a brick he'd bought for less than $1 as part of a bulk scrap lot. He felt a giddiness that was almost intoxicating. He tossed another 10 phones and a handful of dead portable power banks onto the glowing platform. The total value climbed to a satisfying 35.8 points. "Okay, system," he said aloud, his voice echoing slightly in the quiet apartment. "Let's see who's open for business. Searching for compatible low-level trading worlds. Search complete. Connection established. The lost cultivation world, era of decline." The main screen of the interface flickered, resolving into a new image. It was like a grainy video call to another dimension. Leo found himself looking at an old man with a long, wispy white beard and the stern, weathered face of someone who had spent a lot of time scowling at mountains. He was seated in a simple stone cave, lit by a single, sputtering oil lamp. The man's gray robes were clean but patched in several places. The elder stared back at Leo, his eyes filled with a mixture of shock and deep-seated suspicion. A tinny, translated voice issued from the system. Less than a being from a mortal realm? The star-guiding compass has not activated in 300 years. What trinkets could your world of mud and iron possibly offer, greater than? Leo just smiled. He gestured towards the pile of broken electronics on his side of the trade window. Less than, greeting, elder. I have some artifacts. Perhaps you'll find them of interest, greater than. The elder scoffed, his disdain palpable even through the dimensional static. Less than artifacts? Your world has forgotten the touch of spiritual energy. Your finest creations are but clever toys, greater than. System, Leo commanded internally, show him the analysis of the iPhone. On the elder's side, a glowing projection of the phone appeared, rotating slowly. Lines of text, translated into an ancient, flowing script, scrolled beside it. Analysis. Outer shell forged from star silver or aluminum. Contains veins of sun essence gold and earth core copper. The heart is a myriad thought matrix, CPU, of crystalline purity, etched with patterns more complex than 1,000 high-level formation flags. Encased within is a sliver of contained yin lightning lithium-ion battery. The elder's jaw dropped. His eyes, which had been dismissive just a moment ago, were now wide with utter disbelief. He leaned in so close his beard almost singed on the oil lamp. Less than impossible, such intricate craftsmanship. To weave so many rare metals into such a small vessel. And this contained yin lightning. It's dormant, but the potential. This is a foundation for a high-grade lightning attraction treasure, greater than. Leo had to physically bite his lip to keep from laughing out loud. Dude's acting like I just handed him the Holy Grail. It's a dead iPhone. So, Leo said, his tone casual, are we in business? The elder composed himself, but the greed and excitement in his eyes were impossible to hide. Less than, what? What do you ask for in return for these treasures, greater than? Leo browsed the list of items the elder's world could provide. It was mostly low-level stuff, but to a person on a post-apocalyptic Earth, it was God-tier. Foundation establishment pill, low grade, purges bodily impurities, strengthens constitution. Value. 30 points. Basic body tempering scripture. A cultivation manual to slowly refine the physical form. Value. 5 points. Talisman of water generation, single use, creates 5 liters of pure water. Value. 0.5 points. It was a no-brainer. Less than, I'll take the pill and the scripture, greater than, Leo said, trying to sound like this was a perfectly normal Tuesday afternoon transaction for him. The elder didn't even hesitate. Less than, a most fair trade. A most generous trade. Friend from another realm, your magnanimity is as vast as the heavens, greater than. The deal was confirmed. The pile of electronic junk on Leo's floor vanished. In its place, a small, unassuming wooden box and a thin scroll made of tough, leather-like paper appeared with a soft thump. The connection closed. Leo stared at the box. He picked it up. Inside sat a single, grayish-brown pill that smelled faintly of dirt and ozone. This was it, the ultimate cheat code, bought and paid for with garbage. Without a second thought, he popped the pill into his mouth and swallowed. There was no explosion of energy. No blinding light. Instead, a gentle warmth spread from his stomach, seeping into every cell of his body. It felt like sinking into a hot bath after a long, grueling day. Then came the unpleasant part. A layer of greasy, black filth began to seep from his pores, carrying with it a rank odor of old takeout and stagnant stress. It was disgusting, but in a deeply satisfying way. Within minutes, he felt lighter, stronger. He closed his eyes and listened. The muffled screams from outside were clearer now. He could distinguish individual voices, the distance, the type of panic. He could hear the faint sculling of a rat 2 floors below him, its tiny heart beating a frantic rhythm. He could feel the thrum of Chad's terrified pulse in the penthouse directly above. His entire body had been upgraded. This wasn't just survival, this was evolution, express delivered. While Leo was enjoying his personal renaissance, the rest of the city was descending into the 9th circle of hell. At a major supermarket downtown, the last pallet of bottled water became a flashpoint. A brief, brutal war erupted between aisles of breakfast cereal and canned soup. A middle-aged man in a business suit was bludgeoned to death with a can of premium dog food by a desperate mother of 2. Humanity's thin veneer of civilization hadn't just cracked, it had been sandblasted away in under 6 hours. Up in the penthouse, the party was well and truly over. Chad and his 2 surviving friends were huddled in the master bathroom, the door barricaded with an overturned marble vanity. The reek of fear and sweat was thick in the air. Tiffany, the bleach blonde, was no longer clinging to anyone. She was lying in the middle of the living room, twitching, her skin pale and clammy. A dry, rasping cough echoed from her throat, and her eyes, when she opened them, were a solid, bloodshot red. She was turning. "We gotta do something," one of Chad's friends whimpered, his face pale. "We can't just leave her out there." Chad, his face a mask of grease and terror, just stared at the barricaded door. "Shut up. Just, shut up." His arrogance had evaporated, leaving behind a pathetic, quivering core of fear. Miles away, in a sterile operating room at Metropolis General, Dr. Evelyn Reed jammed a surgical tray under the handles of the double doors. She was alone. She had watched a good man, a senior nurse, go berserk and try to bite her before another patient, similarly afflicted, had tackled him. They had torn each other apart in the hallway. Her brilliant mind, accustomed to logic and diagnosis, had pieced it together with horrifying speed. It wasn't a virus in the traditional sense. It was airborne, particulate, like pollen or asbestos. She was desperately trying to jury-rig a filtration mask using a P-100 respirator, 3 layers of surgical cloth, and the activated charcoal she'd smashed out of a water filter pitcher from the break room. She was a survivor, calm and methodical even at the end of the world. Back in his fortress, Leo, now cleansed and feeling more powerful than ever, was examining the body-tempering scripture. It was simple, describing a series of breathing exercises and slow, deliberate movements designed to absorb natural energy. Not much of that around here right now, he thought wryly. Then, a new sound cut through the chaos outside. Knock, knock, knock. It wasn't the frantic, panicked pounding of a desperate survivor. It was a firm, rhythmic, and demanding knock. The knock of someone who expected the door to be opened. Leo glanced at his security monitor, which was powered by the same dedicated battery backup as his computer. Chad stood in the hallway, his face streaked with grime, his expensive shirt torn. He looked like a cornered animal, but his eyes held a desperate, foolish bravado. A voice, strained but trying hard to sound commanding, came through the tungsten carbide door. "Yo, Leo, open the damn door. I know you're in there, you creepy hoarder. I know you got food and water. Hand it over now, and maybe we'll let you be our lookout." Leo stared at the screen. He looked at the cowering, posturing idiot who thought might made right. He looked at his own reflection in the dark monitor, his eyes clear and sharp, a cold amusement dancing within them. A slow, dangerous smile spread across his face. "Oh, Chad," he whispered to the empty room. "You really are determined to win the apocalypse's first Darwin Award, aren't you?" The knocking continued, a steady, arrogant rhythm against tungsten carbide. It wasn't a sound of desperation. It was a sound of entitlement. The kind of knock you use on a hotel room door when you've ordered room service and you're already annoyed it took too long. Leo watched them on the pinhole camera he'd installed months ago, its feed displayed on a low-power tablet. Chad, the penthouse prince, was front and center, his face a greasy mask of fake bravado. Behind him stood 4 other guys Leo vaguely recognized from Chad's obnoxious parties. They weren't finance bros, these were the hired muscle, the hangers-on. One was built like a vending machine with a neck tattoo, 2 others were wiry and twitchy like meth heads, and the last one held a shiny machete like he'd been waiting his whole life for a chance to use it. The others clutched baseball bats. "Cute. Leo, open the hell up," Chad yelled, his voice muffled but clear. "I know you're in there, you freak. We saw you hoarding. We just need some of your supplies for the common good. Don't be selfish." Leo almost snorted. The common good now apparently consisted of Chad and his gang of misfits. The speed at which society's biggest hypocrites started spouting collectivist nonsense when their own necks were on the line was truly a sight to behold. He felt fantastic. The Foundation establishment pill hadn't just cleaned him out, it had rebuilt him from the cellular level up. The constant low-grade ache in his back from sitting at a desk was gone. The slight wheeze he got from running for the subway was gone. His senses were razor-sharp. He could smell the stale beer and fierce sweat coming off the men in the hallway, even through the sealed door. The gentle thrum of his own power, the mental force field, was a constant, comforting presence, stronger now after his body had been tempered. He'd spent a few hours practicing the basic body tempering scripture. The movements were slow, almost like Tai Chi, but he could feel them drawing in something. Not the spiritual energy mentioned in the scroll, the city was dead of that, but it was pulling on the weird, static-laced energy from the electrocharged mist outside, refining it into pure physical power. His muscles felt coiled and dense, like bundles of high-tensile wire. More pounding on the door. A heavy thud, probably from the guy with the neck tattoo trying to shoulder-check it. Leo watched the screen, unimpressed. The door didn't even shudder. He'd paid a premium for that door, a custom job designed to keep out federal agents, let alone a bunch of steroid-addled party boys. Come on, freak, we know you're alone, another one shouted. Leo's lips curled into a thin smile. Alone? Yes. Unarmed? Not exactly. His gaze fell upon a new addition to his collection, lying on the coffee table. It was a wickedly sharp, black dagger, about 9 inches long. Simple, no frills, but it hummed with a faint, malevolent energy. He'd acquired it just an hour ago from the Ashen Magic World. Their civilization had apparently blown itself to magical smithereens and now they were desperate for any kind of fertile resource. He'd traded them a single large bag of premium organic potting soil he'd been planning to use for an herb garden on his balcony. Trade complete. You have traded high nutrient Terran soil, grade C. You have received dagger of minor armor piercing, low grade. The mages on the other side had wept with joy, calling the dirt pristine life essence and Mother Earth's tears. Leo just thought it was hilarious. He'd bought a magic-infused, armor-piercing weapon for $20 worth of dirt from Home Depot. The apocalypse was all about arbitrage. Now, a deep, grinding screech echoed from the hallway. They were trying to use a crowbar on the frame. Idiots. The frame was bolted directly into the concrete structure of the building. They'd have more luck trying to chew their way through. He could feel their frustration building. Their heart rates were climbing. The breathing was getting heavier. This was the perfect time. Let them exhaust themselves. Let them believe the door was their only obstacle. While they toiled, the true currency of this new world was being squandered all over the city. Water. People were getting desperate. On his tablet, switching to an exterior camera view, Leo watched a family on a lower floor smash open the fire hose cabinet in the hall. They filled pots and pans with the stagnant, rust-colored water from the standpipe, oblivious to the fact that it had probably been sitting there for a decade and was now steeped in the same microscopic, gene-altering particles as the mist. They were drinking a cocktail of Legionnaire's disease and forced evolution. Leo looked at his own stockpile. Hundreds of gallons of purified, bottled water. Enough to last him years. All because he was a creepy hoarder. The noises in the hall finally subsided, replaced by cursing and heavy panting. Damn thing's a bank vault, one of the wiry guys gasped. Take a break, Chad ordered, his voice tight with frustration. He can't stay in there forever. He's gotta come out for stuff. It was time. Leo picked up the black dagger, its cold weight feeling perfect in his hand. He took a deep, centering breath, feeling the power in his limbs. He focused his mind, gathering a tiny needle of energy right between his eyes. The mind blast was still weak, more like a firecracker than a grenade, but it didn't need to be strong. It just needed to be a surprise. He walked to the door. He didn't use the peephole. He didn't need to. He could already picture them perfectly, slumped against the opposite wall, catching their breath, their guard completely down. With a whisper-quiet click, he disengaged the 17 locks. Then, he pulled the door inward. The suddenness of it was total. For a split second, 5 pairs of eyes stared at him, wide with disbelief. They saw a man, average height, wearing a simple gray t-shirt and cargo pants, standing in a dimly lit doorway. They expected a cowering nerd. They were not prepared for the dead calm in his eyes. That split second was all he needed. He unleashed the mind blast. He aimed it at the vending machine with the neck tattoo, the biggest physical threat. The man's eyes went wide, his hand flying to his head as if slapped by an invisible ghost. His brain had just been hit with the psychic equivalent of a dial-up modem shrieking directly into his soul. It was just enough. Leo moved. He wasn't running, he was flowing. A blur of motion. 3 steps closed the distance across the hall. The stunned goon was still trying to figure out what just happened when Leo's elbow, hard as a steel pipe, connected with his temple. There was a sickening, wet crunch. No scream. The man's lights went out instantly, and he collapsed to the floor like a sack of laundry. 1 down. The man with the machete reacted next, a guttural yell tearing from his throat as he swung his blade in a wild arc. It was clumsy, fueled by panic. Leo dropped low, the wind from the blade just grazing his hair. As he came up, he drove the black dagger forward. The man was wearing a thick leather biker jacket, something that might have stopped a normal knife. The magic-laced dagger slid through the leather, the muscle, and the rib beneath it as if they were wet paper. The man froze. He looked down at the hilt of the dagger sticking out of his chest, a confused, almost curious expression on his face. Then his eyes rolled back, and he gargled a mouthful of blood before pitching forward. 2 down. The whole thing took less than 3 seconds. The remaining 2, the wiry ones, just stared, their faces masks of pure, unadulterated terror. The world had stopped making sense. The quiet nerd from 47B had just taken out their 2 toughest guys without breaking a sweat. Their survival instincts, far more potent than their loyalty to Chad, screamed one word: run. They dropped their bats with a clatter and scrambled, tripping over each other in their haste to get to the emergency stairwell. Leo let them go. They were more useful alive, spreading the story of the monster in apartment 47B. Fear was a better defense than any wall. And then there was Chad. He was still standing there, pressed against the wall, his crowbar lying useless at his feet. His jaw was slack, his face the color of spoiled milk. A dark, spreading stain bloomed across the crotch of his expensive designer jeans, and the acrid smell of urine cut through the hallway's stench. He was paralyzed, his brain having blue-screened from the sheer horror of what he'd just witnessed. Leo calmly walked over to the corpse of the machete wielder and pulled his dagger free with a squelch. He wiped it clean on the dead man's jacket. He didn't even glance at Chad. He methodically bent down and collected the fallen baseball bats and the machete. Good, solid, low-tech weapons. Always useful. He patted down the pockets of the neck tattoo guy, finding a Zippo lighter and a pack of cigarettes. He took the lighter. Finally, he turned his cold, placid gaze on Chad. The penthouse prince started trembling, a pathetic, whimpering sound escaping his lips. Please, please, don't. Leo didn't say a word. He just grabbed the front of Chad's torn, sweaty shirt and effortlessly dragged him, stumbling and crying, into the apartment. With a heavy, final thump, the tungsten carbide door swung shut, sealing them in. The whimpering was instantly cut off by layers of steel and soundproofing. Silence returned to the hallway, now occupied only by 2 fresh corpses and the lingering smell of blood and piss. Across the hall, behind another reinforced door, an elderly couple huddled in their living room, having heard the brief, terrifying explosion of violence. They didn't call for help. They didn't peek outside. They just turned up the volume on their battery-powered radio, praying whatever angel of death had just visited the hallway would pass them by. Miles away, in the carnage of the downtown shopping district, something was moving. It was a wanderer, but not like the others. This one had been a security guard, a large, heavy-set man. Now, he was something more. His body had swollen to a grotesque size, his skin hardening into a lumpy, gray carapace that looked like cheap concrete. It shambled through the street, ignoring the other moaning figures, and with a guttural roar, it casually backhanded a taxi, sending the vehicle skidding across the pavement with a screech of tortured metal. A juggernaut had been born. The stakes of the game were quietly being raised. In a dark, forgotten data center, a young woman named Hannah pushed her greasy hair out of her eyes. With a grunt, she gave the handle of a hand-crank generator another furious turn. A nearby laptop, a salvaged relic, flickered to life for a few precious seconds. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, trying to piggyback on the building's emergency local network. She just needed to access the security schematics. She just needed to find a way out. Back in apartment 47B, the interrogation was brief. It didn't take much. The sight of Leo cleaning his blood-stained dagger with a calm, almost bored expression was enough to shatter what little was left of Chad's resolve. He babbled everything. He and his now-deceased girlfriend, Tiffany, the one who had turned and been unceremoniously shoved out onto the balcony, had been preparing. Not like Leo, not with meticulous detail. They'd prepared like rich people. They'd thrown money at the problem. The penthouse, Chad confessed between sobs, had a walk-in pantry the size of a small bedroom. It was filled to the ceiling with gourmet canned goods, imported chocolates, cases of champagne, and, most importantly, over 200 cases of Evian bottled water. A king's ransom. Leo listened, his expression unchanging. He now understood. Chad wasn't just a threat, he was an opportunity. A walking, talking, piss-stained treasure chest. His small apartment was a good starting point, a safe bolt hole. But it wasn't a long-term solution. He needed more space, more resources, a true fortress. The penthouse, with its rooftop access, reinforced structure, and massive stockpile, was the perfect upgrade. Leo looked at the blubbering wreck on his floor. It was time to go claim his prize. Time to seize his destiny, one terrified, idiotic neighbor at a time. The real work was about to begin. 3 days. It had been 3 whole days since the world decided to collectively take a nosedive into a dumpster fire. And Leo? Leo was doing just fine. He was better than fine. He was sitting on a ridiculously expensive Italian leather sofa in what was formerly Chad's penthouse, swirling a glass of 20-year-old single malt scotch. On the marble countertop behind him, a perfect medium rare ribeye steak rested, juice pooling around it. The air conditioning hummed, a gentle, soothing sound powered by the building's emergency generator. A generator Leo now had exclusive control over. Outside, the city was starting to stink. With the water and sewer systems kaput, every skyscraper had become a sealed septic tank. The faint, sweet sickly smell of decay was beginning to permeate everything, a constant reminder of the chaos below. The eerie electrocharge mist had finally started to dissipate, but it didn't reveal a familiar blue sky. Instead, the heavens were a jaundiced, sickly yellow, and the temperature was creeping up with an unnatural, oppressive intensity. It felt like the planet was holding a magnifying glass over the city. Leo took a sip of scotch. The fiery liquid slid down a throat that no longer felt like a desk jockey's. The basic body tempering scripture was no joke. He practiced it every morning, feeling the weird energy of the post-apocalyptic world being drawn into his very cells. It wasn't just making him stronger, it was making him better. His mind felt like a freshly defragged hard drive, and his control over his mental force field had grown. He could now subtly nudge small objects from across the room, a neat party trick if there were any parties left to go to. His gaze swept over the luxurious apartment. This was a temporary stop, a stepping stone. After the interrogation, Chad had been more than happy to hand over the keys, the security codes, and a heartfelt apology for being born. Leo had then unceremoniously locked him in a guest bathroom with a case of water and a box of protein bars. A merciful fate, all things considered. The penthouse was a treasure trove, not just of food and water, but of high-value junk. While the rest of humanity was fighting over moldy bread, Leo was methodically stripping the building like a metallic termite. He'd spent the last 2 days pulling copper wiring from unused walls, prying aluminum window frames from their settings, and collecting a mountain of discarded electronics. To everyone else, it was garbage. To him, it was a currency more stable than gold. Speaking of gold, Leo glanced at the pile of glittering baubles on the coffee table. Chad's collection, a dozen gaudy Rolexes, Tiffany's diamond necklaces and earrings, thick gold chains, and even a few bricks of foreign currency from their world travels. In the old world, this heap of metal and compressed carbon represented a lifetime of work for most people. A symbol of status, power, and desire. Leo snorted and pulled up the holographic interface of the Omni trade system. It was time for a little market correction. He picked up a ludicrously large diamond ring, the kind Chad probably used to propose to Tiffany with. He placed it on the trade platform. Item detected. Cut carbon crystal, high purity. Terrestrial value, high. Structural complexity, low. Elemental uniqueness, common. System valuation, 25 trade points. Leo almost laughed out loud. 25 points. He got more for the bag of potting soil. He then tossed one of the Rolexes onto the pile. Item detected. Analog timekeeping device, mechanical. Materials, steel, gold plating. Structural complexity, moderate. System valuation, 45 trade points. Better, but still pathetic. He swept the entire pile of jewelry, watches, and designer handbags onto the platform. The whole gaudy mess. Calculating total value. Total, 1,850 trade points. A king's ransom, barely worth a beat-up sedan in this new economy. It was beautifully, poetically just. He opened a channel to the Ashen Magic world. They were always desperate for anything with a hint of untainted, natural structure. Trade initiated with Ashen Magic world. Leo, you, offering a collection of high-purity crystals and refined metals. See attached. A reply came almost instantly, the text tinged with a magical, flowing script. Magus Alara. More Earth treasures. exquisite. The structure is so pure, uncorrupted by the great fire. What do you seek in return, traveler from the unblemished realm? Leo smirked. Unblemished realm. If only they could smell the hallway outside. Leo, I require a sustainable source of purified water and a method for cleansing small areas of ambient contamination. Mega Solara. A simple request. For this magnificent bounty, we can offer you a sphere of endless dew. It will condense the very air into pure, drinkable water, up to 10 liters a day. We will also include 5 scrolls of lesser purification. They can cleanse a room of foul airs and lingering sickness. Done. Leo confirmed the trade. The pile of diamonds and gold vanished in a soft shimmer of light. In its place appeared a smooth, milky white orb the size of a bowling ball and 5 tightly rolled parchment scrolls. He'd just traded a fortune that could have bought a mansion in Beverly Hills for a water filter and 5 magic air fresheners. And it was the best deal he'd ever made. A soft whimper came from the kitchen. It was Tiffany, the former Instagram influencer, whose every post had garnered thousands of likes, was now his personal chef and housekeeper. Dressed in an oversized t-shirt of his, she looked pale and terrified, a ghost of her former glamorous self. She had tried to play the diva card exactly once. Leo had simply pointed to the locked bathroom door where her boyfriend was currently residing and then to the Evian water she was about to drink. She'd gotten the message. Now, she cooked, she cleaned, and she stayed out of his way. Her world shrunk to the simple equation of obedience for survival. The steak is getting cold, sir, she murmured, not daring to meet his eyes. Bring it here, Leo said, not unkindly. He wasn't a monster, he just understood the new rules. And the first rule was, value is determined by necessity, not by marketing. Tiffany was learning that lesson the hard way. As he ate the steak, he browsed the other available worlds. The pile of scrap metal and copper wire he had collected was far more valuable to the right customer. He opened a channel to the Starfall Remnant, the collapsing machine civilization. Trade initiated with Starfall Remnant. Leo, offering 300 kilograms refined copper, 500 kilograms aluminum alloy, miscellaneous electronic components. See attached manifest. The reply was cold, logical, and instantaneous. Unit 734, query. Materials are of acceptable purity for structural and conductive recycling. Acknowledge. State your required asset. This was the big one. This was the trade that would launch the next phase of his plan. Leo, requesting 1 geological analysis visor, military grade. And a complete, high-resolution topographical and structural map of Sector 7G Beta, his city's designation in their star charts, including all known subterranean structures. There was a pause, a few seconds of calculation on the other end. Unit 734, exchange is logical. The requested data is archaic and of low strategic value to us. The visor is a standard issue decommissioned unit. Your raw materials are of immediate utility. Trade approved. The mountain of scrap metal in the spare bedroom vanished. In its place, a sleek, dark gray visor appeared, along with a small data slate. Leo grinned. He picked up the visor. It felt cool and heavy in his hands. He put it on. The world dissolved into a wireframe of data overlays. He could see the structural integrity of the walls, the stress points in the ceiling, the flow of electricity in the remaining wires. He looked down at the data slate. It displayed a perfect 3D map of the city. With a gesture, he could peel back layers, revealing the subway tunnels, sewer mains, utility corridors, and, there, just as he'd hoped, on the outskirts of the city, marked as an industrial zone, was a large structure. An abandoned winery. According to the schematics, it was nothing special on the surface. But beneath it, the map showed a vast network of interconnected subterranean cellars. Huge, cavernous spaces, built with thick, reinforced concrete to maintain temperature and withstand time. And best of all, the visor's deep scan function highlighted a massive, untapped aquifer directly beneath the foundation. It was a fortress, a self-contained, defensible, underground kingdom just waiting for a king. The penthouse was a gilded cage. The winery was the throne. Suddenly, a crackle of static broke the silence. The old-school, battery-powered radio he'd salvaged was picking something up. A voice, laced with static and desperation, fought its way through the airwaves. This is a broadcast of the National Guard. We have established a secure zone at the city stadium. All survivors. Repeat. All survivors proceed to the stadium. We have food, water, and protection. Leo listened for a moment. The signal was weak, pathetic. The protection they were offering was probably a handful of scared soldiers with rifles against a city full of wanderers and God knows what else. It was a death trap, a beacon for the hungry and the desperate. They were gathering sheep for the slaughter. Miles away, in a sterile operating theater, Dr. Evelyn Reed heard the same broadcast. She held a scalpel with a surgeon's steady hand, but her knuckles were white. Her small group of nurses and security guards were cornered. They had barricaded the surgical wing, but supplies were almost gone, and the moans of the wanderers outside the doors were getting louder, more numerous. The stadium sounded like hope. A foolish, dangerous hope, but hope nonetheless. She had to make a choice: starve in a sterile tomb or make a run for a public slaughterhouse. Back in the penthouse, Leo switched the radio off. He had his own plan. He had his target. Now, he just needed a ride. Walking through the city was suicide, and any normal car was a noisy, gas-guzzling coffin. He needed something else, something better, something reliable, powerful, and quiet. He picked up his glass of scotch, took a final, satisfying gulp, and opened the Omni-Trade interface again, his fingers flying across the holographic screen. His gaze was fixed on the catalog for the Starfall remnant. He scrolled past energy rifles and personal shield generators. He was thinking bigger. It was time to go shopping for a car. The trade was instantaneous. One moment, Leo was staring at a holographic image of what looked like a rejected prop from a sci-fi blockbuster. The next, the entire master bedroom of the penthouse shuddered as several tons of matte black, non-Euclidean angled metal materialized where Chad's king-sized bed used to be. The bed, and the section of Italian marble floor beneath it, were simply gone, compressed into nothingness by the trade system's spatial displacement. Leo didn't even flinch. He just grinned. This was the Scorpion-class all-terrain armored vehicle, and it was beautiful. It wasn't a car, it was a statement. It was low, wide, and angular, like a predator hugging the ground. Its 6 massive, independently suspended wheels had tires made of a memory polymer that looked more like muscle fiber than rubber. The windows were black, seamless slits, and perched on top was a compact, ball turret that swiveled with silent, unnerving speed. The price had been steep, almost his entire haul of copper, aluminum, and precious electronics from the high-rise. Worth every last circuit board. Stepping inside felt less like getting into a car and more like docking with a personal spacecraft. The door hissed open, revealing a Spartan, 2-seat cockpit. There was no steering wheel, just a pair of joysticks and a wraparound console that lit up as he settled into the pilot's seat. Tiffany, who had been cowering in the living room, peeked around the corner, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe. "Pack everything essential," Leo said, his voice echoing slightly in the quiet cockpit. "Water, food, the sphere of endless dew." 5 minutes. She scrambled to obey, her fear a tangible thing in the oppressive heat. It was day 5, and the world had decided to turn on the oven. The so-called flash fry summer had arrived without warning. The temperature outside had climbed past 104 degrees Fahrenheit, and the jaundiced sky seemed to press down on the city, cooking it in its own filth. The asphalt was sweating, and the very air tasted like the inside of a blast furnace. Through the Scorpion's tactical display, Leo could see thermal signatures of small fires starting to bloom across the city as dry trash and debris spontaneously combusted. The city's water mains, stressed by the temperature shift, were starting to burst, turning useless gouts of steam into the superheated air. Leo, however, felt fine. The body-tempering scripture he'd gotten from the cultivator world was working overtime, circulating a strange, cool energy through his veins that fought off the worst of the heat. He'd even figured out how to extend his mental force field into a paper-thin bubble around himself, a personal microclimate that kept his skin from feeling like it was being seared. A neat trick. 5 minutes later, a terrified-looking Tiffany was strapped into the passenger seat, and the Scorpion's massive wheels rolled over the wreckage of the penthouse's front door without a sound. The vehicle was powered by a hybrid solar thermal engine. In this heat, it was practically running on infinite fuel. They descended in the service elevator, which groaned under the weight but held. The parking garage was a sweltering tomb. "Destination locked," a calm, synthesized voice announced from the console. "Abandoned Delacroix Winery. Calculating optimal route." A 3D wireframe map of the city appeared on the main screen, highlighting a path that wound through industrial parks and service roads, avoiding the clogged main arteries. "Engage," Leo ordered, a thrill running down his spine. The scorpion moved. It didn't roar to life, it just flowed. The silence was the most terrifying thing about it. It glided through the dead city like a ghost, its advanced suspension absorbing the bumps and debris so smoothly that the ride was better than a luxury sedan. They passed hordes of wanderers, their skin blistered and peeling in the sun, but they didn't even turn their heads. The vehicle's thermal baffling made it a ghost on their primitive senses. They were heading for the city outskirts, for the winery, for their new kingdom. It was on one of these service roads, snaking past a blocky, windowless building, that the scorpion's synthesized voice spoke again. Alert. Faint, structured energy signature detected. Source. Adjacent structure. Designation. Helios 1 data center. Leo tapped the console, and an external sensor feed popped up. He saw a group of 5 men, shirtless and sweating in the heat, trying to pry open the reinforced steel door of the data center with a crowbar and a sledgehammer. They looked exactly like the kind of post-apocalyptic bottom feeders you'd expect. Wiry, sunburnt, and radiating an aura of desperate, stupid violence. "They're not wanderers," Tiffany whispered, her voice trembling. "No," Leo said, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. "They're worse. They're organized idiots." He brought the scorpion to a silent halt 100 yards away, hidden behind a burned-out delivery truck. A data center, in the middle of all this. His hoarder's instinct was screaming. A place like that would be full of high-end servers, processors, rare earth metals, a gold mine. The faint energy signature meant it likely still had its own power. And that meant someone was probably inside. Just then, one of the bandits, a big lummox with a terrible tribal tattoo, spotted them. He shouted, pointing a grimy finger. "Hey, look at that truck. Fellas, we got ourselves some new wheels." They all turned, their faces lighting up with greedy glee. They dropped their tools and started walking toward the scorpion, brandishing their weapons, a couple of rusty pipes and a handgun that looked like it had been stored in a toilet. Leo chuckled. He didn't even bother with the external speakers. "Computer, activate threat neutralization subroutine. Target extremities and held objects only. Non-lethal." "Acknowledged," the calm voice replied. The ball turret on the roof swiveled to face the approaching men. It was so silent they didn't even notice. The leader, the one with the gun, raised his weapon. "All right, jackass, get out of the damn truck and nobody gets hurt." A tiny, almost invisible red dot appeared on the handgun. There was a soft phhht sound, like a can of soda being opened. A needle-thin beam of blue laser light shot out, and the handgun in the man's hand vaporized into a cloud of glowing metal dust. He stared at his empty, smoking palm, his brain taking a full 3 seconds to process what had just happened. Phed. 4 more beams lanced out in quick succession. The rusty pipes held by his friends disintegrated. Then, the turret adjusted its aim downwards. It was like a sewing machine from hell. The laser bolts stitched a neat line across the asphalt, and with surgical precision, struck each man's kneecap. Not to blow their legs off, but to instantly flash boil the fluid in their joints. The sound was a series of sickening, wet pops. All 5 men collapsed simultaneously, screaming in agony, clutching their ruined knees. The entire engagement had lasted less than 10 seconds. Leo leaned forward and hit the switch for the external speaker. His voice, amplified and digitally altered to a cold, robotic monotone, boomed across the street. "Get lost, or get dead." The effect was immediate. The screams turned into whimpers of pure terror. Forgetting their shattered knees, they began to crawl, to drag themselves away like broken insects, leaving trails of sweat and grime on the hot asphalt. It was pathetic. It was beautiful. "Well, that was a fun little detour," Leo said cheerfully, turning to Tiffany. Her face was chalk white, her mouth hanging open. She was staring at him not as a man, but as some kind of new, incomprehensible force of nature. He gave her a wink. "Now, let's see who they were trying to bother." He drove the scorpion right up to the data center's main door and killed the engine. The silence that fell was heavy, broken only by the distant, fading wails of the bandits. He waited. A minute passed. Then, a small camera lens above the door swiveled to look directly at them. Inside, Haley was shaking. Not from fear anymore, but from a dizzying cocktail of adrenaline and disbelief. For 2 days she had been trapped, living off the last of a vending machine, watching those thugs trying to break down her door. She was a genius, a self-taught engineer who could hack into a DoD server with a laptop she built from spare parts, But in this new world, her genius meant nothing against a brute with a sledgehammer. She had been counting the hours until the door gave way, her stomach churning with dread. Then, this thing had appeared. A silent, black chariot from a sci-fi movie. She watched on her security monitor as it effortlessly, almost casually, dismembered and humiliated the men who had been her personal boogeymen. It wasn't a rescue, it was an extermination. The man who stepped out of the vehicle wasn't a hero. He was tall, with an average build, but he moved with an unnerving calm, his eyes scanning the building with a cool, appraising look. He looked less like a savior and more like a corporate raider assessing a new acquisition. Leo walked to the door's control panel. It was a high-security keypad, fried by the initial EMP. Useless. He placed his hand on the metal plate. Computer, bypass. A low hum emanated from the Scorpion, and the sophisticated magnetic lock on the door clicked open with a pathetic thunk. The heavy door swung inward, revealing a young woman standing in the gloom of the lobby. She was thin, her face smudged with dirt, but her eyes were sharp and fiercely intelligent behind a pair of thick framed glasses. She was holding a fire extinguisher like a club, the last line of a defense she knew was useless. Leo didn't say hello, he didn't ask if she was okay. He simply tossed her a bottle of water and a nutrient bar from his belt pouch. Her hands, surprisingly steady, caught them out of the air. "I'm Leo," he said, his voice back to normal. "I need an engineer, someone who can maintain and possibly improve my equipment. Come with me, you get a secure place to live, all the food and water you need, and a chance to work with technology you've only dreamed of." He gestured back at the Scorpion. "Stay here, and you'll die." The next group of scavengers might not be so easily discouraged. Haley looked from the water bottle in her hand to the impossible vehicle parked outside, then back to the calm, terrifyingly pragmatic man in front of her. There was no hesitation, no tearful thanks. She was too smart for that. She recognized a paradigm shift when she saw one. "My name is Haley," she said, her voice hoarse but clear. "My workshop is in the main server room. Give me 10 minutes to pack my tools." He nodded, a flicker of approval in his eyes. A valuable asset, obedient and understood the score. Perfect. As Haley gathered her custom-built diagnostic tools and hard drives, Leo watched the city burn on the Scorpion's display. The small fires were merging, creating walls of flame that were slowly closing off the city's arteries. They had gotten out just in time. Unbeknownst to him, the crawling, whimpering bandits had finally reached the stadium, babbling to a skeptical National Guard officer about a monster truck and a man who shot light from its roof. A seed of curiosity and greed had been planted. 10 minutes later, Haley was in the passenger seat, Tiffany having been moved to a small, makeshift space in the back. The new destination was still the winery. As they pulled away, Haley looked back at the data center, her prison and her sanctuary for the last 5 days. She felt no sentimentality, only the thrilling, terrifying promise of the future. An hour later, they arrived. The Delacroix winery stood on a low hill, silhouetted against the sick yellow sky. It was exactly as the schematics had shown, a sprawling complex of brick and stone, looking deceptively peaceful. But Leo's new geological visor, now integrated into the Scorpion systems, told a different story. The place was crawling with wanderers. Dozens of them, shuffling aimlessly around the buildings, drawn to the shade and the cool stone. That was manageable. The problem was what the visor showed inside the main fermentation hall. It was a thermal signature 10 times the size of a normal human, radiating a deep, dormant heat. It was curled up in the center of the vast room, like a dragon on its hoard. "Haley," Leo said, his voice low and serious as he zoomed in on the thermal image. "Your first job. I need a way to clear out a building of about 50 hostels, plus one very large, very angry-looking variable, without leveling the structure." Haley leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with manic professional interest as she stared at the problem on the screen. The fear was gone, replaced by the pure, unadulterated joy of an engineer facing a new challenge. "I think," she said, a slow smile spreading across her face, "I can work with that." The air inside the Scorpion was a crisp 70 degrees, a pocket of Arctic sanity in a world gone mad. Outside, a heat shimmer distorted the view, making the Delacroix winery look like a watercolor painting left out in the rain. The sun was a malevolent, yellow eye, cooking the very stones of the hillside. You could practically hear the planet groaning. Wanderers, dozens of them, moved with the slow, agonizing listlessness of melting candles, seeking shade under eaves that offered no real relief. They were the background noise of this new reality. Annoying, but predictable. The real problem was the big, angry thermal blob sulking in the main building. "All right, Haley," Leo said, his voice cutting through the cockpit's quiet hum. He swiveled in his pilot's seat, a motion so smooth it was almost robotic. "New hire orientation, pop quiz. We have, let's call them 50 entry-level hostels outside. We have one senior management level hostel inside. The vehicle is overkill for the little guys but might get flipped by the big one if we go in loud. The building is our prize, so we can't just nuke it from orbit. Your thoughts?" Haley, still looking a little shell-shocked but with a fierce, analytical light in her eyes, didn't miss a beat. She leaned forward, her fingers tapping on the auxiliary console he'd given her control of. "The goal is asset acquisition with minimal structural damage. The variable is the large thermal signature. We don't know its capabilities. Direct confrontation is inefficient." She looked up from the screen, her gaze sharp. "We need to make our enemies fight each other." A slow, wolfish grin spread across Leo's face. Oh, he liked this one. She got it. She wasn't weighed down by old-world morals or hero complexes. She saw a problem and looked for the most efficient, ruthless solution. "A keeper. I was thinking the same thing," Leo said, his good mood practically radiating. He pointed to a secondary building on the schematic. "This is a bottling and storage facility. According to the winery's old public records, they used large quantities of high-proof industrial alcohol for sterilization. If we can create a significant, noisy, and very hot event over there." Haley's eyes lit up. "You'll draw the wanderers. A chaotic, flammable distraction." "Exactly. And a big enough boom," Leo continued, his grin widening, "should be enough to piss off whatever's sleeping in the main hall. Annoy it. Coax it out into the open to see what all the fuss is about. And that's when it meets our second group of hostels," Haley finished, a flicker of something that looked suspiciously like excitement on her face. Her gaze darted to a sensor feed showing the edge of the property line. A barely visible heat signature was hiding in a cluster of heat-blasted trees a few hundred yards away. A beat-up pickup truck and about 8 men, waiting. "Oh yeah," Leo chuckled. "There's always another group of idiots. They must have heard my little laser light show back in the city and followed us, thinking they could pick up the scraps." He imagined them, sweating in the miserable heat, thinking they were clever predators waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The sheer, unadulterated stupidity of it all was almost beautiful. "Okay, new plan is the old plan, but better," Leo declared. "Haley, you're on Overwatch. Keep the Scorpion systems cloaked and use the long-range audio sensors. Let me know if our fanboys in the trees get antsy. I'm going for a little stroll." He unstrapped himself, grabbing a small, dark gray dagger from a magnetic clip on his belt. It was a simple blade from the cultivator world, infused with a low-level sharpening charm. Basic but absurdly effective against unarmored flesh. He palmed a small, cheap-looking Bluetooth speaker he'd picked up from a looted electronics store. A piece of junk, really, but about to become the star of the show. Stepping out of the Scorpion was like walking into an oven. The heat was a physical blow. But for Leo, it was merely an inconvenience. A thin, invisible sheen of his mental force field shimmered around his body, deflecting the worst of the heat. It felt like standing in the shade on a pleasant 80-degree day. He looked over at the shuffling wanderers, their skin cracked and baked. Pathetic. He moved with a fluid silence that defied the crunch of dry leaves under his boots, skirting the main cluster of wanderers. He found the sterilization shed easily, its metal door warped by the heat. A simple kick was all it took to buckle the lock. Inside, the air was thick with the fumes of alcohol. Perfect. Several large, 50-gallon drums of the stuff were lined up against a wall. It was a bomb maker's paradise. He placed the little speaker on a shelf, cranked the volume on his phone, and put on a playlist he'd titled, Apocalyptic Motivation. The first track was a screeching death metal song. The sound, tinny and distorted, ripped through the oppressive silence. The effect was instantaneous. The wanderers, previously aimless, all snapped their heads in the direction of the noise. Their groans took on a new, hungry urgency. They began to shamble, then lurch, then break into a clumsy, stumbling run towards the shed, a tide of rotting meat drawn to a dinner bell. Leo was already moving. He swiftly uncapped 2 of the drums, tipping them over. Clear, pungent liquid glugged out onto the concrete floor, spreading rapidly. He backed out of the shed, took cover behind a thick stone wall, and pulled out his laser pistol, a sidearm he'd traded for with some scrap aluminum. He aimed at the pool of alcohol. As the first wanderer stumbled through the doorway, he pulled the trigger. There was no bang, just a silent, red beam that touched the alcohol. The world erupted in a whoosh of blue-white fire. A concussive force slammed into Leo's chest even from behind the wall, and a wave of heat washed over him, hot enough to make his personal force field flicker. The entire shed became a raging inferno, the death metal song abruptly cutting out, replaced by the shrieking of burning wanderers. Then came the roar. It wasn't a human or animal sound. It was a deep, guttural, echoing bellow of fury from the main winery building. It was the sound of a king being rudely awakened from its nap. The ground itself seemed to tremble. "Big boy's awake," Haley's voice crackled through his earpiece, calm and professional. "The scavenger team is moving in. They think the explosion was us getting into trouble. They're approaching the main entrance." "Showtime," Leo whispered, a predatory thrill running down his spine. He sprinted back to the Scorpion, vaulting into the pilot's seat just as the main doors of the winery buckled outwards. What shambled out was the stuff of nightmares. It was huge, easily 12 feet tall, a bloated, vaguely humanoid monstrosity of flesh and wine-stained skin. Its body was a grotesque parody of a fermentation tank, swollen and distended. Tubes that looked like mutated grapevines snaked across its body, and vents on its shoulders puffed out clouds of flammable, wine-scented vapor. A bloat, Leo decided. That felt right. It shambled into the courtyard, its tiny, piggy eyes glowing with rage, looking for the source of the disturbance. At that exact moment, the scavenger crew broke from the trees. There were 8 of them, led by a brute with a sawed-off shotgun, their faces alight with greedy confidence. "Look at that, they blew themselves up," the leader yelled. "The truck's ours. Let's go, mop up whoever's left." They charged forward, right into the courtyard, and came face to face with the bloat. The silence that followed was priceless. The leader's cocky grin froze, then melted into a mask of pure, abject terror. The 8 men skidded to a halt, their primitive human brains trying and failing to process the walking abomination in front of them. The bloat roared again, a sound of pure hatred and charge. From the safety of the Scorpion's cockpit, Leo and Haley watched the carnage unfold on the main screen like a private screening of a monster movie. It was a massacre. The shotgun blast bounced off the bloat's rubbery hide like a spitball. The creature swung a massive club-like arm, and the leader simply ceased to exist, turning into a red spray. Another man screamed as the bloat grabbed him, shoving him into a gaping maw in its stomach that steamed with digestive fluids. The rest of the scavengers broke and ran, screaming like children. The bloat, wounded from the explosion and now enraged, was a force of nature. It trampled one, backhanded another into a wall with a sickening crunch, and stomped a third into a messy paste. It was brutal, it was chaotic, and it saved Leo a lot of ammunition. When only 2 of the scavengers were left, crawling desperately away, and the bloat was panting, its side blackened and split from the initial explosion, Leo decided it was time to intervene. "All right, my turn," he said, his fingers dancing over the controls. The Scorpion glided forward, its movements utterly silent. The ball turret on the roof swiveled. Phed, a hair-thin laser beam lanced out, striking one of the crawling scavengers in the back of the head. His body went limp. Phed, the second scavenger crumpled. Easy. The bloat turned its furious, tiny eyes toward the new threat. It let out another roar and charged, its heavy footfalls shaking the ground. "Haley, target the leg joints and the vapor vents on its shoulders," Leo ordered calmly. "Targeting," she replied, her voice a monotone of focus. The turret became a silent death machine. A series of rapid phhhht sounds, barely audible, echoed in the cockpit. Precise blue beams stitched across the bloat's knees. The creature's charge faltered, its massive legs buckling. It roared in pain and confusion. More beams lanced out, striking the vents on its shoulders. The vapor ignited, turning the creature's own fumes against it. It became a walking torch, wreathed in purple-blue flames, shrieking a horrible, high-pitched squeal. It stumbled, crashed to the ground, and after a few agonizing moments, lay still. The silence that fell over the winery was absolute. "Threats neutralized," Haley reported, though it was obvious. "Structural integrity of the main building appears intact." Leo leaned back in his chair, a deep sense of satisfaction washing over him. He had used his enemies to destroy each other, taken out 2 threats for the price of 1, and secured his new castle, all without breaking a sweat. This was how you survived. Not with brute force, but with a cold, calculating mind and overwhelmingly superior firepower. The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. Stage 1. Initial securing. The heat hadn't broken, but inside the cool stone walls of the winery, it was another world. Under Leo's direction, Haley, a true genius with anything mechanical, hotwired a forgotten forklift. They dragged heavy steel plates, salvaged from the bottling machinery, and welded them over every window and secondary entrance. They left only one way in and one way out, the main loading bay. Here, they constructed a choke point, a 20-foot-long corridor in a Z shape, impossible to rush and easy to defend. It was a fortress in the making. As night fell, a strange phenomenon was reported on the last few functioning emergency channels. The flash fry summer had done more than just cook the city. It had evaporated a huge portion of the main river that dissected it. For the first time in centuries, the deep, muddy riverbed was exposed. And in the murky depths, observers swore they saw something massive, something long and serpentine, stirring beneath the sludge. Miles away, in a besieged hospital, a woman with ice-cold eyes named Dr. Frost made a hard choice. Her small group of survivors was running out of supplies. Waiting for rescue was a fantasy. "We move tonight," she told her people, her voice leaving no room for argument. "We move, or we die here." They didn't know that their desperate breakout would lead them directly into the path of a hunting pack of wanderers, far from the safety of Leo's new domain. And in a heavily fortified government remnant at the city stadium, the greedy and ambitious Captain Wong listened to the terrified, rambling report from his scouts about the massacre at the winery. He heard about the silent, black vehicle and the beams of light. He didn't feel fear, he felt greed. An asset like that belonged to him, to the new government. He began to gather his best-equipped men, a predatory gleam in his eye. Leo knew nothing of this. He stood in the cavernous main hall of his new fortress, the ghost of the bloat's stench still hanging in the air. The place was secure, for now. But security was just the first step. They needed power. They needed a sustainable food source. Tiffany, who had been hiding in the Scorpion the whole time, was now looking at him with an expression of pure, unadulterated worship, which was slightly unnerving but mostly useful. He ignored her, his mind already on the next problem. His eyes fell upon the real treasure of this place. Not the structure, but its contents. Racks upon racks of wine bottles. Thousands of them. High-end, vintage wine. Behind them, in the storage sheds, were mountains of empty glass bottles, wooden crates, and corks. Riches. Not to drink, but to trade. A faint, blue holographic screen bloomed into existence, visible only to him. The interface of the primordial myriad worlds trading system. On one side, he saw his inventory, 15,482 bottles of vintage Cabernet Sauvignon, 50,000 empty glass bottles, 3 tons of oak staves. On the other side, a universe of possibilities waited. He cracked his knuckles, a wide, excited grin spreading across his face. It was time to go shopping. The world outside the winery was dissolving. 15 days. It had been 15 agonizing days since the world went to hell. The flash fry summer had mercifully ended, but the planet, apparently feeling creative, had decided to follow up its heatwave act with acid rain. It wasn't the flesh-melting stuff of comic books, not yet anyway. It was more like a persistent, drizzling poison. It sizzled on metal, leaving ghostly white scars. It turned the last few pathetic leaves on the trees into a mushy, brown slurry. Puddles on the ground weren't water anymore. They were miniature chemical traps, fuming slightly in the gray, oppressive twilight. And the wanderers? Some of them, the ones that hadn't melted, seemed to be adapting. Their skin, already tough and leathery, was now taking on a weird, waxy sheen, like poorly made candles. They shambled through the toxic downpour, completely unbothered, which made the simple act of stepping outside about 10 times more suicidal than it was yesterday. Inside the deep, cool stone cellars of the Delacroix winery, it was another reality entirely. "Okay, final tally," Haley's voice echoed slightly in the massive barrel room. Her face, illuminated by the beam of her headlamp, was smudged with dust but alight with a kind of manic energy. She looked at the tablet in her hand, one of the few hardened, offline devices that had survived the EMP, and then at the mountains of treasure surrounding them. Approximately 70,200 empty glass bottles, vintage green. 12 metric tons of stainless steel, mostly from the fermentation tanks and piping. 4 tons of high-quality oak staves. And, she paused for dramatic effect, 15,482 bottles of what the labels claim is world-class Cabernet Sauvignon. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and confusion. In the 2 weeks since I'd pulled her from that server room, she'd gone from a terrified survivor to a fiercely loyal lieutenant. The girl was a born quartermaster. She saw this hoard and saw a logistical masterpiece. I saw something else. I saw the keys to a kingdom. Good work, Haley, I said, clapping her on the shoulder. She practically preened. It was funny how simple validation had become the world's most valuable currency. People were starving, not just for food, but for purpose. I could give them that. Food. That was the next problem. Our fortress was secure, but it was also a prison. A well-stocked, comfortable prison, sure, but a prison nonetheless. Our packaged rations wouldn't last forever. Outside, the world was a toxic, monster-infested supermarket where all the shelves were bare. You could kill 100 wanderers, but you couldn't eat him. Trust me, someone had tried. It didn't end well. A faint blue glow, invisible to Haley, bloomed in front of my face. The familiar interface of the primordial Myriad Worlds trading system. It was time to pull the trigger. Time to cash in my mountain of trash for a ticket out of the Stone Age. I gestured to Haley. Take a break. Get some rest. Big day tomorrow. She nodded, too exhausted to argue, and headed towards the small, cot-filled room we designated as sleeping quarters. The moment she was gone, my focus narrowed. I pulled up 2 trading channels simultaneously, a little trick I'd been practicing. It felt like trying to pat my head and rub my stomach while juggling chainsaws, but my mental force field had been getting stronger, and with it, my ability to mentally multitask. On the left screen, a connection to the fading ash magical world. A shaky image of a man in ornate, tattered robes appeared. Archmage Valerius, a being of immense power in a world that was literally crumbling into dust around him. His world had high magic, but they'd forgotten how to make a simple, clean steel pot. Lord Trader, he boomed, his voice full of desperate grandeur. You honor my humble scrying pool with your presence. Has the great cataclysm in your realm yielded more of the divine metals? I swear, this guy could make ordering a pizza sound like a world-altering prophecy. On the right screen, a connection to the Stardust Remnants mechanical civilization. The face here was just a pulsing, geometric pattern of light. Unit 734, an AI administrator for a dying robot collective. Their problem was the opposite of Valerius's. They could build a Dyson sphere, but they'd run out of the raw iron ore and silicates to do it. Query, its synthesized voice stated, devoid of all emotion. Active trade request detected. Specify inventory. I grinned. Time to play the game. To Valerius, I sent a mental image of a mountain of stainless steel fittings and gleaming glass bottles. Archmage, I have an abundance of refined crystalline structures and corrosion-resistant alloys. Enough to rebuild your alchemical labs 10 times over. His ethereal jaw dropped. By the 7 stars. Such purity. Such craftsmanship. What is your price, Lord Trader? Name it. To Unit 734, I sent the exact same inventory list, but without the flowery language. Just raw data, tons, materials, purity percentages. Data received, it buzzed. Inventory is acceptable. Base materials are of a low grade but sufficient quantity. Specify desired technology. This was the fun part. The hustle. Archmage, I said, my voice low and serious. I require a source of continuous, unending power. Something to drive back the cold and the dark. I need one of your lesser geothermal hearts. Valerius paled. The heart? Lord Trader, that is a relic of the First Age. It requires the life force of a magma spirit to function. I don't have a magma spirit, I said flatly. But I do have an offer from another party for these materials. A party that deals in pure energy conversion. A total bluff, but he didn't know that. The Archmage began to sweat. Wait, perhaps the rituals can be modified. For a vessel of such pure alloy and crystal, it could potentially regulate the core's energies without a host spirit. Yes, it is possible. A risky but glorious endeavor. Deal. The lesser geothermal heart is yours. Bingo. 1 down. I turned my full attention to the AI. Unit 734. Your offer is insufficient. These materials are valuable. Correction, the AI retorted. The materials are common. Their value is in their consolidated state. We offer standard issue technology. 1 atmospheric water condenser or 1 nutrient paste synthesizer. Garbage. I needed a real upgrade. Counter offer rejected, I said, leaning back in my chair. I am adding a new item to my side of the trade. I uploaded the data on the 15,000 bottles of Cabernet Sauvignon. Not just the physical specs, but the chemical breakdown, the complex organic compounds, the subtle notes of oak and blackberry, the entire history of its fermentation. To a civilization of inorganic beings who only understood data, this was art. This was chaos. This was a completely alien form of complex information. The geometric pattern on the screen flickered wildly. For a full 10 seconds, there was silence. Analyzing. New data packet. The AI's voice came back, with what I could have sworn was a hint of static, like surprise. Organic composition. High complexity. Non-repeating molecular chains. A chaotic but stable information system stored in a liquid medium. This is novel. Re-evaluating trade parameters. Your request? I want your Genesis class rapid growth hydroponics system, I stated, my heart pounding. The full array, lighting, nutrient pumps, seed bank, the works. Another pause. The Genesis system is a colony seeding technology. It is considered high value. And your civilization is dying of resource starvation, I shot back. You can't eat data, but you can study it. Think of what you could learn from these chaotic information systems. Maybe it'll teach you how to think outside the box before your stars go dark. The pulsing light stabilized. The logic is compelling. Trade accepted. Transmitting schematics for material deconstruction and acid reconstruction. Prepare for matter stream. I leaned back, a massive, triumphant grin spreading across my face. On the system interface, my mountain of junk vanished. In its place appeared two glowing icons, a pulsating, magma-red sphere, and a complex schematic of silvery blue machinery. I had done it. I had traded trash for a new world. The next day was a blur of controlled chaos. I showed Haley the schematics. She didn't ask where they came from. In this new world, you learned not to ask stupid questions when the boss pulled a miracle out of his hat. Her eyes, the eyes of a true engineer, lit up as she absorbed the alien, yet brilliant, designs. This is incredible, she breathed. The power efficiency, the closed-loop system. Leo, this is a generation ahead of anything I've ever seen. Can you build it? I asked. She gave me a look that said, is the sky blue? Give me a wrench and get out of my way. And she did. We hauled the pulsating geothermal heart, a sphere of obsidian-like rock that radiated a gentle, comforting warmth, into the deepest part of the cellar. Following the schematics, Haley, with the brute force of the forklift and the precision of a surgeon, began assembling the hydroponics system. It was a beautiful thing to watch, a symphony of clicking metal and focused effort. And then, it was done. Okay, Haley said, wiping sweat from her brow. Primary power conduit is linked to the geothermal heart. Nutrient lines are primed. All systems are green. I think. Light it up, I said. She took a deep breath and flipped a single, large breaker switch we'd jury-rig. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a low hum started, vibrating through the stone floor. The geothermal heart in the next room began to glow, its magma-red light pulsing with a steady, living rhythm. A wave of clean, dry heat washed through the cellar, chasing away the damp chill for good. Then, the lights came on. Not harsh, yellow incandescent bulbs, but rows and rows of long, elegant tubes that glowed with a soft, ethereal, purple-pink light. The entire, massive cellar was bathed in the color of a sunrise. It was breathtaking. The automated system kicked in. Sprinklers hissed, releasing a fine mist of nutrient-rich water. In hundreds of small pods, tiny mechanical arms deposited single seeds into a growing medium. The purple lights intensified their glow over the pods. And we watched. It was the most boring, and yet the most thrilling, thing I had ever seen. Under the accelerated growth lamps, we could literally see life happening. Tiny green shoots poked their heads out of the dark soil. They unfurled, reaching for the light, growing visibly, minute by minute. Haley started to make a small, choked sound. I looked over and saw tears streaming down her face. Not tears of sadness, but of overwhelming, gut-wrenching relief. After 2 weeks of dust, decay, blood, and gray despair, she was seeing life. She was seeing green. She was seeing a future. I walked over to one of the lettuce pods, where a small, tender green leaf had already grown to the size of my thumb. I plucked it gently, the small snap echoing in the quiet hum of the room. I popped it into my mouth. It was crisp, clean, and bursting with a flavor I'd forgotten existed. The taste of life. I looked at Haley, whose sobs were now quiet sniffles of pure joy, and then at the glowing Eden we had built in the heart of a dead world. From now on, I said, my voice calm and absolute. We never go hungry again. Miles away, in the gutted remains of a superstore, a young woman named Maya huddled behind a collapsed shelf. Her clothes were rags, her face thin and smudged with dirt. Rain, the acid rain, streaked down a broken skylight, sizzling on a pile of shopping carts. In front of her, she shielded a small, pathetic-looking plant in a cracked plastic pot with her own body. It was a tomato plant, a freak mutation that had somehow survived the flash fry. On one of its vines hung a single, small green tomato. Get out of the way, girl, a man's voice rasped. He was gaunt, his eyes wild with hunger. Two other desperate figures flanked him. Give us the plant. No, Maya whispered, her voice trembling but firm. She clutched the pot tighter. It's not ready. It's still growing. We don't care. We're starving. She squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the inevitable violence. For her, that single green tomato wasn't just food. It was the only thing in this dead world she had managed to nurture. It was hope, a hope she was willing to die for. Further still, Captain Wang's armored personnel carrier sloshed through the flooded, acidic streets. The rain was an annoyance, but their military-grade gear held up. He scowled at the bleak landscape. His scouts' reports about the winery massacre had been intriguing. A silent vehicle, beams of light, an entire scavenger crew wiped out. Greed, sharp and hot, burned in his gut. Anything, Corporal? He barked into the intercom. Sir, the ambient radiation is hell out here, but I'm getting something new, the corporal's voice crackled back. A localized, stable energy signature. Dead ahead. About 2 clicks. It's clean. Incredibly clean. Not like a jury-rigged generator. This is sophisticated, almost like a pre-cataclysm military bunker just powered on. A predatory smile stretched across Captain Wang's face. He imagined a hidden government holdout, full of weapons, food, and technology. An asset that, by rights, belonged to him. To the new power in this city. Full speed ahead, he commanded, his eyes gleaming. Looks like we just found the jackpot. 20 days. 20 days since the reset button got slammed on civilization. The acid rain had finally let up, leaving behind a world that looked like it had been scoured with industrial-grade bleach and smelled like a leaking battery. Stepping outside for more than a minute still required a filter mask, not because of monsters, but because the air itself felt vaguely spicy. And not in a good way. The local insect population had apparently taken the new chemical atmosphere as a challenge. I'd seen a beetle the size of my fist trying to carry off a hubcap yesterday. A hubcap, but inside my new kingdom, the Delacroix winery, it was another story entirely. The air in the main cellar was warm, humid, and smelled of chlorophyll and clean earth. The rows of hydroponic trays, bathed in the perpetual pink-purple glow of the alien grow lamps, were a riot of green. Lettuce heads were the size of cabbages. Tomato vines, thick as my thumb, were already heavy with blushing red fruit. Haley, my one-woman engineering corps, had even managed to get a patch of strawberries going. Freaking strawberries. In the middle of the apocalypse. She'd gained weight. The haunted, starved look in her eyes was gone, replaced by the focused intensity of a born tinkerer. Right now, she was hunched over the guts of an old, disc-shaped industrial floor-cleaning robot, muttering to herself. If I can just reroute the primary logic board past the environmental sensors and slave it to a remote camera feed, she mumbled, not to me, but to the robot itself. I can make you my little eye in the sky. Or, well, my little eye on the ground. I left her to it. Purpose was the best medicine in this new world, and Haley was mainlining it. Me? I was playing with my new toys. In exchange for a few rusted-out tractors I'd found in a shed, the perpetually desperate Archmage Valerius from the Fading Ash world had sent me a beginner's Watchman's Matrix. It was a set of 6 smooth, palm-sized stones that hummed with a faint energy. The instructions, which looked like they'd been scribbled by a wizard with a caffeine addiction, said that when placed in a perimeter, they would create a psychic tripwire, alerting the master to any hostile intent that crossed its border. I wasn't a wizard, but I did have a security camera system and a roll of duct tape. I was integrating the stones into the camera network, wiring their psychic ping to a small buzzer on my command console. It was a perfect marriage of magic and modern paranoia. The buzzer went off. It wasn't a loud noise, just a low, insistent beats that cut through the gentle hum of the grow lamps. My head snapped up. Haley froze, a screwdriver halfway to the robot's motherboard. I walked over to the bank of monitors, my heart kicking into a steady, business-like rhythm. This wasn't panic. This was customer service. Someone had arrived unannounced. "What is it?" Haley whispered, her voice tight. "Company," I said, leaning closer to the screen. The camera I'd mounted on the main gate's archway showed two military-style jeeps rolling to a stop about 100 yards out. They were kicking up clouds of the corrosive dust. Men in mismatched pieces of body armor and carrying standard-issue rifles jumped out, fanning into a sloppy defensive perimeter. About 20 of them. Leading them was a man with a chest puffed out like a pigeon, wearing an officer's cap that looked 2 sizes too big for his head. "Military?" Haley asked, a flicker of hope in her eyes. The poor girl still had a scrap of faith in the old world. "Military-ish," I corrected, a cold smile touching my lips. "Look at them, they're scavengers with matching hats. And they're about to be very disappointed." A moment later, a crackle of static filled the air, followed by a voice amplified through a cheap megaphone. "Attention occupants of the winery." The voice boomed, echoing across the blighted landscape. "This is Captain Price of the United States Continuity Government Task Force. You are in possession of a secured, high-value asset. By the authority vested in me, I am commandeering this facility and all resources within for the national reconstruction effort. You have 5 minutes to open the gates and surrender peacefully. Your cooperation will be noted." I couldn't help it. I chuckled, a deep, genuine laugh. "Continuity government?" I muttered to myself. "Buddy, the only continuity is that idiots like you are still trying to give orders." Haley looked at me, her brief hope curdling into understanding. "Leo, what are you going to do?" I picked up the microphone wired to the external PA system. I didn't need to shout. "Captain Price," I said, my voice calm and conversational, broadcast across the silent yard. "That's a nice speech. You guys have a script you work from?" There was a moment of confused silence from their end. The man in the cap, Price, snatched the megaphone back. "This is not a joke. We are the law. You will comply." "The law? The nation?" I leaned back in my chair, putting my feet up on the console. This was more fun than I expected. "They don't exist anymore, Captain. The subscription expired. Out here, there's only one law. My law. And my first law is, don't point guns at my house." "Insolence. You have 2 minutes before we use force," he shrieked, his voice cracking with indignant fury. "That's a shame," I said, my voice dropping the humorous tone, becoming flat and cold as ice. "I was going to offer you a bottle of water." I clicked off the mic. I turned to Haley. "Go to the east cellar. Put on the noise-canceling earmuffs. It's about to get a little bright." She just nodded, her face pale but resolute. No stupid questions. No moralizing. She knew who kept the lights on and the strawberries growing. She scrambled off without a word. On my screen, I watched as Captain Price gestured furiously. A squad of 8 men, looking nervous but high on their captain's bluster, jogged forward. They fanned out, taking cover behind one of the jeeps as they approached the gate, ready to blow the locks. They were now well within the kill zone. I rested my finger on a newly installed, labeled red button on my console. The trade with Unit 734. The Genesis hydroponics system wasn't the only thing I'd gotten for that delightful vintage Cabernet. The AI, fascinated by the chaotic information of fermented grape juice, had thrown in a little bonus. A perimeter defense package. I'd spent the last 3 days with Haley mounting them. 2 Mark IV plasma turrets, now concealed in pop-up housings on the winery's roof. Sleek, silent, and utterly overkill. "Okay, boys," I whispered to the monitor. "Let's see what happens when old world muscle meets new world management." I pressed the button. There was no sound, not from my end, anyway. On the roof, 2 panels slid open with silent, oiled precision. The turrets rose, their multifaceted optics glowing with an internal blue light as they acquired targets. And then they fired. It wasn't an explosion. It was an erasure. 2 silent, actinic blue beams, thick as a man's arm, lanced through the gray air. They moved with the impossible speed of light itself. The first beam struck the jeep the soldiers were using for cover. The metal didn't buckle or explode. It simply ceased to be. In less than a second, the entire front half of the vehicle, engine block and all, was converted into a cloud of incandescent gas and molten slag that dripped onto the ground like burning taffy. The second beam, operating on its own targeting solution, performed a gentle, elegant sweep across the 8-man squad. There were no screams. There wasn't time. One moment they were men with guns. The next, they were just gone. A faint shimmer in the air, a whisper of superheated steam, and a few blackened boots left on the pavement. The beam painted a perfectly straight, glowing hot line of vitrified dirt where they had been standing. The entire event took maybe 2 seconds. On the other side of the yard, Captain Price and his remaining dozen men stood frozen. Their mouths were hanging open. The man with the megaphone dropped it. It hit the ground with a dull thud that sounded like a cannon blast in the sudden, profound silence. Their brains, evolved for a world of bullets and bombs, simply could not process the silent, absolute annihilation they had just witnessed. They stared at the bisected, melting jeep. They stared at the empty space where their comrades had been. The smell of ozone and cooked metal reached them, and a primal, gut-twisting terror finally broke through their shock. One soldier dropped his rifle and ran. Just turned and sprinted blindly away into the wasteland. Then another. Then Price himself seemed to wake from his trance, scrambling backward, tripping over his own feet. He shrieked something incoherent and clawed his way into the remaining jeep. Within seconds they were peeling out, fishtailing in the dust, fleeing as if the devil himself was at their heels. I watched them go, a thin, satisfied smile on my face. Message delivered. I leaned back, taking a deep breath. Phase 3 of the base build-out was officially complete. This was no longer a shelter. This was a fortress. And it had teeth. A notification pinged on another screen, a direct feed I'd set up from the system, scraping data from the few still functioning satellite networks. It was a filtered news blurb, pieced together from fragmented military and emergency broadcasts. Alert. In classified geological anomaly. I-5 bridge collapse. Cause. Hostile bioform. Designation. King crawler. Estimated mass. Greater than 50 tons. Repeat. All major transit arteries are compromised. A mental image flashed in my head. A crab the size of a city bus, its shell harder than steel, was methodically snipping the city's bridges in half. Fantastic. The world outside was getting more creative in its attempts to die. This fortress felt more valuable with every passing second. Another data packet came through. This one from one of the patrol bots I'd gotten from Unit 734. They were junkers, really, little more than glorified security cameras on wheels, but one had been close enough to the city's main hospital to pick up a fragmented radio signal. Is anyone out there? This is Dr. Evelyn Reed at Mercy General. We are trapped. The subjects have breached quarantine. They're not like the ones outside. God, they're changing. The signal cut out into static. Dr. Evelyn Reed. The name clicked. Before the world went sideways, she was a leading surgeon, a genius in her field. The attack from Captain Price had taught me a valuable lesson. A strong wall and big guns were good, but they were reactive. I had food, I had power, I had security. But I only had one engineer and a CEO who was good at trading junk. It wasn't enough. If Haley got appendicitis tomorrow, we were screwed. If a new plague swept through, we were dead. You can't build a new world with just 2 people. I stood up and walked over to a large, paper map of the city we'd pinned to the wall. I looked at the winery, our little bubble of life. Then I looked at the red circle Haley had drawn around Mercy General Hospital. The world outside was a death trap. But it was also full of resources. And the most valuable resource wasn't steel or food or even tech. It was people, skilled people. Haley, I called out. She emerged from the cellar, earmuffs in hand. It's over? That was just the appetizer, I said, tapping the map. How are you with retrofitting a forklift for off-road travel and maybe adding some steel plates? Her eyes lit up with that familiar, manic engineering spark. What are we doing? We're going on a recruitment drive, I said, a grin spreading across my face. It's time to go headhunting. 5 days. 5 days since I turned a squad of military wannabes into a bad memory and a scorch mark on the pavement. 25 days since the world took a nosedive off a very tall cliff. The proof that my paranoia had been a sound investment strategy was all around me. Inside the winery, the air was a gentle, recycled 72 degrees. I was eating a fresh salad, the lettuce so crisp it sounded like I was stepping on dry leaves. The water in my glass was so pure it was almost tasteless. Haley, bless her gear-greased heart, had hooked up a taste synthesizer module she'd bartered from some robotic civilization. Now it tasted like lime. Freaking lime-flavored water in the middle of the apocalypse. Life was good. Too good. A fortress is great, but a fortress with only 2 people in it is just a really well-defended cage. My biggest vulnerability wasn't a 50-ton king crawler tearing down a bridge, it was a ruptured appendix. I was a logistics guy who could trade junk for miracles, and Haley was a tech witch who could turn a toaster into a death ray, but neither of us could so much as stitch a deep cut without consulting a YouTube video that no longer existed. We needed people, the right people, and that's why I was currently strapped into the driver's seat of the Scorpion. Haley had taken my request to heart. The vehicle that had once been a heavy-duty, 4-wheel drive forklift was now an angular beast of burden. She'd welded scavenged steel plates to its chassis, creating a sloped, ugly as sin armored shell. The forks had been replaced with a heavy-duty hydraulic ram, perfect for clearing roadblocks. It wasn't fast, but it moved with the same stubborn inevitability as a glacier. I loved it. Defense grid is green, Haley's voice crackled through the comms unit I wore. All perimeter warnings are active. Watcher stones are online. You so much as get an aggressive paper cut and I'll know about it. Good to know, I said, steering the Scorpion around the melted carcass of Captain Price's Jeep. Keep studying those schematics I downloaded. I want to see a working prototype of that water from air condenser when I get back. Aye, Captain, she chirped, the excitement of new tech puzzles evident in her voice. The line went dead. She was happy. She had a purpose. Now, it was time to find someone else a new one. The drive to Mercy General was a tour of a dying world. The sky was a permanent, sickly yellow, like old parchment. The corrosive dust from the acid rain days still lingered, forming a low-lying haze that limited visibility to a few hundred yards. The roads were littered with the skeletons of cars, their paint peeled away, their tires melted into black puddles. I didn't even bother trying to steer around a smaller wreck blocking my path. A low growl from the engine, a grinding crunch, and the Scorpion simply shoved the burned-out sedan aside like a child's toy. Easy. My mental force field pulsed faintly, low-grade hum in the back of my mind, giving me an almost precognitive sense of the unstable debris around me, allowing me to dodge the worst of it without even thinking. Mercy General Hospital loomed out of the haze like a tombstone, a massive, 10-story block of concrete and glass, now dark and silent. The main entrance was a disaster zone, choked with abandoned vehicles and the scattered, chalky remains of wanderers who had been caught in the last acid rain. This wasn't a place for a frontal assault. I parked the Scorpion in a covered ambulance bay, the heavy ram nudging a biohazard container out of the way, and killed the engine. Time for some modern-day magic. Haley's latest project was a commercial quadcopter drone I'd found, which she'd retrofitted with a whisper-quiet motor and a high-gain camera. I pulled out the controller, its screen flickering to life. The drone lifted off with a barely audible whir, a tiny ghost against the yellow sky. I piloted it towards a shattered window on the 6th floor, the surgical wing, according to the faded hospital directory. The view inside was hell. The corridors were draped in what looked like thick, gray cobwebs, but they pulsed with a faint, sickly light. The bodies here weren't the shambling, noisy wanderers I was used to. These were different. They were desiccated, thin, wiry husks of people, their skin stretched tight over their bones like dried leather. They clung to the walls and ceilings, motionless, indistinguishable from the shadows. Stalkers, a new and improved brand of horror. Fantastic. The drone drifted down the hallway, its camera panning left and right. I found them, barricaded inside a large operating theater. The drone's microphone picked up faint voices. I zoomed in through the reinforced glass of the door. I saw her, Dr. Evelyn Reed, even exhausted, her face smudged with dirt and her lab coat torn. She had an air of sharp, cold authority. She was directing 2 other people, a man and a woman, as they checked the barricade made of gurneys and medical equipment. In the center of the room, another person lay on an operating table, hooked up to an IV bag that was nearly empty. There were maybe 6 of them in total, all bearing the same haggard, haunted look of people living on borrowed time. The drone had served its purpose. I guided it back and prepped my gear, plasma pistol on my hip, the energy-etched knife from the 2chan world strapped to my vest, a handful of high-intensity flashbangs. Time to make an entrance. I didn't bother with stealth. The stalkers were silent, which meant they hunted by sight and sound. So I gave them a sound. I slammed the heavy steel door to the stairwell open, the bang echoing like a gunshot through the dead building. And then I ran. My body, enhanced by the primal body method I'd traded for, felt light and powerful. I took the stairs 3 at a time, my boots hammering a rhythm of defiance against the concrete. On the 3rd floor landing, the first stalker dropped from the ceiling. It was impossibly fast, a blur of gray limbs and grasping claws, its movements utterly silent. My pistol was already in my hand. I didn't aim, I just pointed and fired. A searing blue bolt of plasma hit it mid-air. There was a wet hiss, a flash of incinerating flesh, and the thing simply dissolved into a puff of greasy smoke and ash. Too easy. I reached the 6th floor without any more trouble. The corridor leading to the OR was thick with the things. At least a dozen of them were plastered to the walls and ceiling, their heads all slowly turning towards me, the new, loud noise in their quiet hunting ground. I unclipped a flashbang. I wasn't trying to stun them. I was just ringing the dinner bell. I tossed it down the hall. The resulting boom and blinding white light was deafening. As one, the stalkers detached from their perches and swarmed towards the source of the noise. And right past me, as I flattened myself into the doorway I'd just come through. A chittering, rustling tide of mummified death flowed down the corridor. Amateurs, I muttered, and sprinted in the opposite direction, toward the operating theater. I slammed my armored boot into the barricade. Gurneys screeched and tumbled. I burst into the room. "Dr. Evelyn Reed?" I asked, my voice calm, the plasma pistol held loosely at my side. 6 pairs of terrified, exhausted eyes snapped to me. Evelyn, her face a mask of disbelief, nodded slowly. Who are you?" Before she could continue, a skinny man with weaselly eyes and a cheap suit stepped forward. He pointed a trembling finger at me. You have a weapon. You have to get us out of here. You have to share your supplies. We have a right to be saved." I just stared at him. The sheer, unadulterated stupidity of the statement was almost breathtaking. I glanced at Evelyn. Her expression was one of pure, undiluted disgust. "Marcus, shut up," she hissed, her voice like chipping ice. "No," Marcus whined, his voice rising in pitch. "He's strong. He owes it to us. We're the weak ones. He has a responsibility." Something incredible happened. Evelyn didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She simply raised her hand, her fingers slightly crooked, and stared at Marcus's outstretched arm. A fine, white frost suddenly bloomed on the sleeve of his suit jacket. Marcus stopped mid-sentence. His eyes widened. He let out a choked gasp, then a full-throated scream of agony, clutching his arm. "Aghh. It's cold. It's burning." Under the fabric, his arm was turning a mottled, bluish-purple color. His own blood, freezing solid in his veins. I felt a genuine smile spread across my face. Oh, I was definitely recruiting her. I let Marcus scream for a few more seconds before I spoke, my voice cutting through his pathetic wails. I looked directly at Evelyn, ignoring the writhing idiot on the floor. "I only deal with assets," I said, my voice clear and businesslike. I reached into a pouch on my vest and tossed her a small, self-injecting syringe filled with a shimmering green liquid, a basic regeneration solution from the Tu-Chan sect. It could regrow a finger. A little internal frostbite was nothing. "You," I said, nodding at her, "are an asset. Your friend on the table is a potential asset." I jerked my chin towards Marcus. "As for the trash, it's best to take itself out." Evelyn stared at the syringe in her hand, then at me. The cold fury in her eyes was replaced by dawning comprehension. She wasn't just looking at a rescuer. She was looking at a new law of nature. The rustling sound from the hallway grew louder. The stalkers, their initial distraction over, were coming back. The remaining survivors gasped in terror. "Stay behind me," I said, not as a request, but as a command. I stepped into the doorway just as the first stalker rounded the corner. It launched itself at me. I didn't even raise my pistol. My left hand shot out, palm open. A shimmering, invisible wall of force, my mental field, slammed into it, sending it flying back into the 2 creatures behind it. They tumbled into a heap. A blue bolt from my pistol erased the one on top. I flowed forward, my energy-etched knife now in my right hand. The primal body method wasn't just for running, it was for moving. I sidestepped a lunge, the knife drawing a glowing green arc that severed a stalker's head from its shoulders. It didn't bleed, it just crumbled into dust. Another one leapt from the ceiling. I didn't even look up. The plasma pistol fired, tracking and vaporizing it mid-flight. It was a dance, a brutal, efficient, one-sided ballet of annihilation. Mental push, plasma shot, knife slash. In less than 30 seconds, the corridor was clear. The only things left were faint scorch marks on the walls and piles of fine gray dust on the floor. Silence returned, thick and profound. I holstered my pistol and turned back to the room. The survivors were staring, their faces a mixture of awe and primal fear. Marcus had finally stopped screaming, and was now just whimpering. Evelyn stood ramrod straight, the syringe clutched in her hand like a holy relic. She was a genius, a pragmatist. She understood what she had just seen. Not just a rescue, a power demonstration, an offer. The man on the table, I said, my voice returning to normal. What's his condition? She blinked, snapping back to her professional self. Sepsis. Puncture wound to the abdomen. Without proper antibiotics and a sterile environment, he'll be dead in 12 hours. Get him stable. My vehicle is in the ambulance bay. It can transport him, I commanded. I then looked at the other survivors, my gaze lingering for a moment on Marcus and the other person who had been nodding along with his demands. You have 5 minutes to gather your essential personnel and anything you can't live without. Anyone not ready by then gets left behind. No one argued. Far away, in a reinforced concrete bunker that served as the local command post for the U.S. continuity government, Major Thorne slammed his fist on the table. Are you telling me, he growled, his face livid, that 2 entire jeeps and 20 armed soldiers under your command were neutralized in less than 5 seconds by, what? A laser beam? Captain Vance, his uniform rumpled, his face still pale with terror, could only nod mutely. It wasn't a sound, sir. They were just deleted. The men, the jeep, just gone. We were facing a god. Thorne took a deep breath, trying to control his temper. Gods don't live in wineries, Captain. This is advanced, pre-fall technology. Something private, something Sertovsky powerful. Get me every satellite image we have of that area for the past month. I want to know who owns that fortress. And I want a plan to take it. Vance's report was a disaster, but it was also a revelation. In a world starved for resources, someone had built paradise. And he wanted it. The ride back was quiet. Evelyn had used the regeneration shot on her patient, and the man's vitals had stabilized almost instantly, a fact she was still trying to process with scientific disbelief. She'd made her choice clear. She and her 2 loyal nurses were in. Marcus and his friend were not. I didn't ask what happened to them. I didn't care. The trash had been taken out. Evelyn sat in the passenger seat of the Scorpion, staring out at the blighted landscape. You have a base, she stated, not a question. I have a fortress, I corrected. With power, clean water, and fresh food. Her sharp eyes met mine. What do you want in return? Your skills, your loyalty, your absolute, unquestioning competence in your field, I said plainly. I provide the sanctuary, you provide the expertise. It's a simple transaction. She nodded slowly, a flicker of something new in her eyes. Respect, a simple transaction, she repeated, as if tasting the words. I can do that. As we rumbled along a lesser-used bypass, something caught my eye. Off to the side of the road was the wreck of what used to be a massive commercial agricultural center, Bright Grow Farms. Most of its huge greenhouse domes were shattered skeletons of steel and glass. But not all of them. In the very center of the complex, one smaller dome was almost entirely intact. And inside, it was a riot of impossible green. The plants weren't just alive, they were thriving. Some of them mutated into strange, vibrant forms that seemed to curl protectively around the central area. And standing in the middle of it all, her hand resting gently on a vine as thick as a python, was a young woman with a backpack. Her lips were moving. In the dead silent world, with nothing but the low rumble of the Scorpion's engine, it looked for all the world like she was whispering to the plants. And they were listening. I slowed the Scorpion to a stop, a new, acquisitive gleam in my eye. A doctor, a mechanic, and now, maybe, a gardener. My little fortress was about to get a whole lot more self-sufficient. The ride back from Mercy General wasn't exactly a party wagon, but it was close enough. In the passenger seat, Dr. Evelyn Reed, my newly acquired ice queen of a medic, was running a sample of Wanderer blood through a portable scanner I traded for last week. She was in her element, her cold professionalism a comforting presence. Behind us, her 2 loyal nurses were tending to the septic patient, who was now miraculously stable thanks to a little alien goo. The Scorpion, my armored forklift tank, rumbled along, a 10-ton bubble of safety in a world gone straight to hell. 30 days, a full month since the universe had a psychotic break. The weather decided to join the party. 1 hour ago, it was a tolerable 60 degrees. Now, the digital thermometer on the dash was reading 32 and dropping fast. The sickly yellow sky was turning a dirty, bruised gray. Then it started. Snow. Not the clean, white stuff from Christmas movies. This was ash snow, flakes of gray filth that streaked the armored windows, remnants of the acid rain and God knows what else. The flash freeze was here, phase 2 of the apocalypse rolling in right on schedule. I cranked up the internal heater, luxury powered by a softball-sized geothermal core I'd bought from a bunch of subterranean magic users. Outside, the world was dying. Inside, we were cozy. Haley, status report, I said into the comms. All green here, boss, her cheerful voice chirped back, a welcome sound. Geothermal core is purring like a kitten. The whole sub-level is a balmy 75. I'm telling you, this is better than my old apartment. How's the new talent? Acquired, I said, glancing at Evelyn. She's already trying to cure the apocalypse with a handheld device. I think she'll fit right in. Evelyn didn't even look up from her scanner. The cellular mutation is fascinating. It's not viral or bacterial. It rewrites genetic code on a quantum level. It's elegant. See? A perfect fit. A pragmatist who could appreciate the terrible beauty of it all. As we navigated a bypass clogged with frozen, rusted-out cars, I saw it. An anomaly, an impossibility. Off the road, nestled in the skeletal remains of a massive commercial greenhouse complex called Bright Grove Farms, was a single, smaller geodesic dome. It was almost perfectly intact. And inside, it was a jungle. A vibrant, defiant explosion of green in a world that was now monochrome gray. The plants weren't just alive, they were monstrously so. Vines as thick as my arm coiled around the steel struts, and strange, brilliantly colored flowers bloomed in the face of the freezing air, pulsing with a faint inner light. And in the middle of this impossible Eden was a girl. She looked young, maybe early 20s, wearing a worn-out hoodie and a large backpack. Her hand rested on a massive, pulsating gourd like she was checking its pulse. Her lips were moving, and I swear on all the junk I've ever traded, it looked like she was talking to the plants. And they were bending towards her, like flowers tracking the sun. I brought the scorpion to a grinding halt, its heavy treads crunching on the frozen asphalt. A new kind of hunger, the collector's urge, sparked in my gut. I had a doctor for the body and a mechanic for the machines. But this was something else entirely. A biologist, a gardener, a goddamn druid in the middle of the zombie apocalypse. My little fortress was about to get a major upgrade. What is it? Evelyn asked, finally looking up. Her eyes widened as she saw the dome. It's the next piece of the puzzle, I murmured. But, of course, nothing is ever that easy. Paradise always has a snake. Or in this case, a bunch of morons. A group of about 5 people emerged from behind a larger, shattered greenhouse. They were led by a guy in a bright red tracksuit who looked like he'd escaped from a terrible 90s music video. His hair was slicked back, and he walked with an obnoxious swagger that screamed, "I peaked in high school." As they approached the girl, the guy in red held up his hand, and a pathetic little flame, about the size of a Bic lighter, flickered to life in his palm. And awakened, a low-level one, by the looks of it. Maya, quit stalling, the tracksuit idiot yelled, his voice thin and reedy. The boss is getting impatient. Hand over the glow berries. We need that energy boost. The girl, Maya, stood her ground, placing herself between them and a bush covered in shimmering, faintly glowing blue fruit. They're not ready, Blaze, she said, her voice quiet but firm. Picking them now will kill the plant. Who cares about the stupid plant? He sneered, puffing out his chest. I have the power of fire. I am the Flame Emperor, Blaze. This whole place, and you, belong to me now. Your job is to grow the stuff, my job is to use it. That's the new world order. I almost laughed out loud. Flame Emperor? Seriously? This guy was a walking, talking participation trophy. The sheer, unadulterated stupidity was a thing to behold. My door hissed open. The sudden blast of freezing air was sharp, painful. I stepped out onto the ground, my plasma pistol holstered on my thigh. The scorpion alone was an intimidating sight, but a man stepping out of it, completely unfazed by the cold, was another level of weird. Blaze and his crew of knuckle-draggers turned to look at me. He saw my clean clothes, my calm demeanor, my ridiculously oversized vehicle. He didn't see a threat. He saw a target. Well, look what we have here, he announced, gesturing at me with his flaming hand. A new car, and supplies, I bet. Hand them over, buddy. In the name of Blaze, your new lord and master. Evelyn's voice came over my earpiece. Hostile individual, likely an early-stage pyrokinetic awakened. Low energy output, narcissistic personality disorder. I'd recommend immediate neutralization. Way ahead of you, Doc, I muttered. Blaze took my silence as weakness. He puffed himself up, and the flame in his hand grew to the size of a grapefruit. You deaf? I am a god of the new world. You should be on your knees. He hurled the fireball. It flew through the air with a sad little whoosh and splattered against the side of the scorpion. It left a black soot mark about the size of a dinner plate. That's it. My ride had taken acid rain, bullets, and a military-grade explosion. This was like being attacked by an angry marshmallow. Blaze's jaw dropped. His followers looked confused. They'd clearly never seen their emperor's power fail so spectacularly. I didn't say a word. I just unholstered my plasma pistol. It hummed softly, a blue light glowing in its core. It was sleek, alien, and utterly silent. Blaze actually laughed. A high, nervous giggle. What's that? A toy? You think a little light-up gun is gonna scare me? I raised the pistol. A thin blue line of light shot out. It wasn't loud. There was no bang, no recoil. Just a faint VZZZT sound, like a bug zapper. The bolt crossed the 30 yards between us in an instant and hit Blaze square in the shoulder. His tracksuit melted, his skin vaporized, his shoulder bone glowed white-hot for a microsecond before the bolt cauterized its way straight through. He was thrown backwards 5 feet, landing in a heap in the grimy snow. The pathetic little flame in his other hand sputtered and died. He wasn't dead, but he was screaming, a high, piercing shriek of pure agony, clutching the smoking, perfectly round hole in his shoulder. Silence. The other 4 guys stared at the hole in their boss, then at my silent, smoking pistol, then at my completely emotionless face. Their brains, tiny as they were, finally did the math. They didn't even look back. They just turned and ran, scrambling over the debris and vanishing into the gray blizzard. The New World Order, it seemed, had a very high turnover rate. I holstered my weapon and walked past the whimpering, crippled, Flame Emperor, without a second glance. He was just trash on the side of the road now, and the cold would take care of him soon enough. I stopped in front of Maya. She was staring at me, her eyes wide, a mix of fear and something else, awe, maybe. She was clutching a small, dirt-stained trowel like it was a weapon. It was kind of adorable. I didn't look at her. My gaze swept over her impossible garden. The pulsating gourds, the glowing berries, the fiercely protective-looking thorn vines. I even saw a pack of what looked like oversized rats with thick, shaggy fur and canine-like teeth huddled in the back, watching me warily. Wolf rats. And they weren't attacking her. She had tamed them. I have a place, I said, my voice calm, professional. My breath plumed in the freezing air. Underground. It's warm, powered by the Earth's core. We have automated hydroponics, full-spectrum grow lights, a limitless supply of purified water. I finally looked at her, but my words weren't for her. They were for what she represented. They were for the life she cherished. I can give them hectares of space. I can give them perfect, tailored light and soil. I can give them absolute, unwavering safety from the cold, from the monsters, and from the idiots. I jerked my head back towards the screaming man in the snow. In return, I said, my voice dropping, becoming a simple statement of fact, a transaction, you and all of them will serve me. You will grow food that makes my people strong. You will raise beasts that will guard my walls. Your garden will become my arsenal. It wasn't a rescue, it was a business proposal. An acquisition. Maya had the power of life. She could feel the truth in my words, the sincerity of the promise I made not to her, but to the ecosystem she protected. She looked from me to her shivering plants, then at the wolf rats hunkering down against the biting wind. Her choice was already made. She nodded, clutching her trowel. They accept. Far away, in the concrete bunker of Fort Determination, Major Thorne looked at the satellite map. A thermal anomaly had just registered. A small, intense heat signature, a fireball, had appeared and then vanished at the old Bright Grove Farms location. That's where the runner we picked up said that fire-wielding freak, Blaze, made his camp, Captain Vance pointed out. And now the heat signature is gone, Thorne mused, steepling his fingers. Either his campfire went out, or something put him out. This winery fortress, it's projecting power. First my squad, now this little warlord. It's clearing the board. Sir, we've assembled the strike team. 24 of our best men, plus the 3 awakened we have on retainer. An earth mover and a wind manipulator. We're ready. Good, Thorne said, a predatory gleam in his eyes. In a world of starvation, a man with a fortress full of food is a king. It's time to pay him a visit. I want that winery. I want whatever technology he's hiding. Move out. The return to the winery was triumphant. The massive, reinforced steel gate groaned open, revealing the warm, well-lit interior of the main factory floor. Haley was waiting, practically bouncing on the balls of her feet. You brought back a doctor and a hippie? Boss, you're the best shopper ever. She cheered. Maya's jaw dropped as she stepped out of the Scorpion. She stared at the clean concrete floors, the bright overhead lights, the sheer order of the place. When I led her down into the sub-levels, to the vast, empty caverns I had designated for expansion, her eyes filled with tears. They'll be so safe here, she whispered, looking at the space not as an empty cave, but as a future paradise. I left Haley to get Maya and Evelyn settled. My job was done. I had acquired a head of medicine and a head of biological assets. My little post-apocalyptic corporation was growing. Back in my command center, formerly the winery's tasting room, I sat down and let out a long breath. A small panel on my desk glowed, a holographic interface only I could see springing to life. Transaction complete. Item. Intel Core i9-9900K CPU, pristine. Quality. Legendary, pre-fall artifact. Value. 9,850 SU, structural units. Threshold reached. System upgrade available. Unlocked. World Tier 2 feed trading. Y.N. A slow, predatory smile spread across my face. This was it. The next level. Access to worlds with more advanced tech, more powerful magic, more insane opportunities. I was about to press Y when a red light flashed on a monitor to my left. It was our long-range motion tracker, a system Haley had cobbled together from scavenged weather station radar. Haley's voice, stripped of all its usual cheer, crackled over the intercom. Alex, get up here. Now. I ran to the main control room. On the screen was a nightmare. A dozen dots, moving in a coordinated, tactical formation, were converging on our position. They were heavy vehicles, military grade. I'm picking up comms chatter, Haley said, her face pale. They're calling themselves Strike Team Alpha. They're talking about liberating us. I looked at the screen, at the army coming to knock on my door. Then I looked back at my personal holo interface, at the button that promised a whole new tier of power. Liberate me? I thought, the smile returning to my face, sharper and more dangerous than before. Idiots. They didn't bring an army. They brought me new trading materials.